Chapter 119. Fong stared blankly at the portrait on the table. His expression was blank, but his heart was in turmoil. He vaguely felt that he seemed to have accidentally discovered a great secret. Could it be that the son-in-law was still not satisfied with the first miss, and was still thinking about the second miss? In an instant, Fong's heart fell into endless anxiety and confusion. What to do, what to do? Should he tell the first miss, or should he tell the second miss? Since he already knew about this matter, he would be disloyal if he did not report it to the first miss. But betraying the son-in-law would be unjust, and it might even destroy a good family. Old Fong would not be the culprit who would destroy a family. Secretly tell the second miss? Forget it. For the safety of the son-in-law and his own life, it was best to never let the second miss know about this. Fong, who was caught in the choice of loyalty, had a very complicated look in his eyes, and the expression on his face kept changing. Young master. Young master? Zheng Zimo finally noticed that something was wrong with Li Yi's expression, and called out softly with some confusion. Li Yi came back to his senses, and realized that he had made such a big mistake before. A man secretly hiding a woman's portrait. This was very thought-provoking. Fortunately, Rui and Xiaohuan did not see it. Otherwise, they would have thought that he had some improper thoughts about this Miss Zimo. I'm really sorry. After taking the portrait that day, I didn't open it. I didn't think that I had taken the wrong one. However, the portrait is not with me at this time. I will bring it tomorrow and give it to you. Li looked at her and said apologetically, Thank you, young master. Zheng Zimo nodded and said softly. Her eyes swept over the surrounding walls, and she wanted to say something but stopped. Is there anything else, Miss Zimo? Li seemed to have something else to say and asked in confusion. A trace of hesitation appeared on Zheng Zimo's face. And then she said, To be honest, Zimo would like to ask young master what kind of technique you used to make this portrait so lifelike. The person in the painting seems to be walking out of the painting. She didn't dare to look up at Li Yi. She knew that it was a bit abrupt to ask these questions at this moment. Painting techniques were the summarization of a person's experiences over a long period of time. To those who were skilled in the Tao of painting, they were incomparably precious. Even she wouldn't easily teach these things to others. Rashly asking others about these things was truly a bit disrespectful. But she was too curious about this kind of technique. She thought about it all day long, to the point that she couldn't eat or sleep well. If she didn't ask, it would be too painful. Zimo, Miss Zimo, said. This was what she meant by her presumptuous request. For Li Yi, this was really not a troublesome matter. He immediately taught her how to deal with light and shadow, the change of scale, as well as the technique of composition and so on. This was not a secret, nor was it something like alcohol distillation, which he was going to use to eat. There was no confidentiality to speak of. Since Zheng Zimo asked, he could not hide it. Zheng Zimo didn't expect him to agree so easily, as if he didn't care about these things at all. He didn't even say a word of refusal, however. At this moment, she didn't have the time to be surprised. It was the first time for her to hear what Li Yi had said. She silently memorized it all in her heart. These days, she had been studying painting by herself, and she had gained a lot. In fact, many areas were only separated by a thin layer of window paper. Li Yi only needed to give her a few pointers, and she could immediately see through the clouds and see the fog. For a moment, her beautiful eyes were full of splendor. As Li Yi spoke, he began to be a little surprised in his heart. The ability of this Miss Zuamo to accept things was really a little unexpected. Often he just said a sentence, and she could think of the real key point. Thinking back to when he was bored, he taught Xiaohuan how to draw. Under his personal teaching, the little maid still did not make any progress for several days. Comparing the two, the gap was really too big. Fong stood behind Li Yi, watching him and the beautiful woman talking happily. And her heart became more and more complicated. The matter of the second miss had not been resolved yet, and the son-in-law was flirting here. If the first miss saw it, although the first miss was usually gentle, if she was angry it was really scary. Sigh. Things were getting more and more complicated. Fong sighed, and her heart was even more tangled. Thank you, young master, for dispelling my doubts. Zuamo is really grateful. Today's harvest was quite fruitful. Many of the things that Li Yi said were things she had never heard before. It was enough to open up a new school of painting, and all her doubts were solved today. Zheng Zueimo's expression was solemn, and she bowed to him with a serious face. The two were only acquaintances, but he was willing to teach her all these techniques. His breadth of mind was unprecedented. She had received his kindness, and even bowed to him as a disciple was not an exaggeration at all. At this time, thinking of the misunderstanding between the two before, and that she had mistakenly regarded him as a lecher, Zheng Zueimo was extremely regretful. How could such a broad-minded and noble person be a lecher? Miss is too polite. Li Yi raised his hands with a smile and said, "If you have any sisters you are familiar with who also want a 3D portrait, you can have them come to me. 10 liang of silver for one. The price is fair, and I do not cheat anyone. If there are many, you can even get a discount." Just now, Li Yi was thinking that 3D painting had never appeared in this world before. Perhaps it would be very popular. Which woman did not want to keep their youthful, alluring, and infinitely charming appearance, so that when they grew old and faded, they could have a souvenir? Pointing at the portrait, he boasted to his descendants, "Back in the day, grandmother was also known as a beauty in Qing'an." Ha! Hearing this, Zheng Zueimo couldn't help but freeze. A portrait 10 liang of silver? If you feel the price is not right, we can discuss it when the time comes. Li Yi said with a serious expression. If there are still people who want to learn 3D painting, I can also open a class. You only need to pay 20 liang of silver as an entrance fee, and I guarantee that you will be able to learn and master. Li Yi felt that he had found a new way to make money. He could open a training organization in ancient times and hire a few famous scholars as teachers, such as Learn Poetry from Yang Yanzhou, 30 days crash course on 8-legged essays. XX can teach you to write a good policy paper in 2 months. He could open some classes like this. He even thought of the name of the training organization. It would be called New Oriental, Learning to Cook. Which school was the best in tutoring for scientific exams? Set your sights on New Oriental of Qing'an. Chapter 120. Zheng Zueimo left with the little servant girl. When she left, the expression on her pretty face was a bit absent-minded. It seemed that she didn't take his words to heart, which made Li Yi a little disappointed. Women and children's money was the easiest to earn. This was an unchanging truth. If all the girls in the brothel in Qing and prefecture could spend 10 taels of silver to buy a portrait, then he could at least save a few years of hard work. But thinking about it, painting all day was boring. How could it be as carefree as being a shopkeeper who didn't have to do anything? Li thought about it and gave up on this idea. When he was about to go back to the yard to bask in the sun, he turned his head and saw Fong standing there, looking at him with a leisurely gaze. What's wrong? He felt a chill in his heart after being stared at by Fong and asked, "Who was that girl just now?" Fong put away his usual silly smile and asked with a straight face. Although the son-in-law was walking down the wrong path, Fong felt that the son-in-law could still be saved. He had to persuade him not to always associate with these shady women outside. The eldest miss was such a good person. Why didn't he know how to cherish her? Her name is Zheng Zueimo, a friend. You wouldn't know her even if I told you, Li Yi said casually. When Zheng Zueimo left just now, she ordered a lot of rui nectar from here. She said that she bought it on behalf of the sisters in the Jade Yard. This immediately made her good impression in Li Yi's heart improve a lot. Zheng Zueimo, Miss Zueimo? Fong's eyes widened and he blurted out, "The top artist of the Jade Yard? You know quite a lot." Li looked at Fong with a bit of surprise. "That's Miss Hong from the Jade Yard." Fong curled his lips and stopped abruptly after saying half a sentence. He looked back and saw that the 4 girls were still busy over there. Only then did he relax. "What's wrong with Miss Hong?" Li crossed his arms and looked at him with a teasing expression. "What Miss Hong?" Fong looked at Li with a puzzled expression. Li looked at him and said, "I'm going back to the courtyard. Do you have anything else?" Fong hurriedly stepped aside and said, No more. Son-in-law, you go ahead. I'll look after the store. First miss, second miss." Li had just taken 2 steps when Fong suddenly cried out in surprise. Li glanced at him indifferently. Such a childish trick might work on a brat, but if he wanted to trick him, Fong had miscalculated. Sister Rui. A few crisp voices came from the direction of the counter. Li looked back at the girls. Did Fong collude with them? Through the corner of his eyes, Li saw that the portrait of Lu Rui, that he had left on the table at the side, and forgot to put away, was picked up by someone. Her pretty face was slightly startled, and an indescribable color flashed in her eyes. Mississippi. Lu's gaze looked over, and with a slight shake, the painting was put away and held in her hand. Son-in-law Uncle Fong. Xiao Huan followed behind Lu Rui, and walked in from the outside with a smile. Fong looked at the thing in Lu Rui's hand, and then looked at Li Yi. He silently took a small step towards Li Yi's side. If second miss got angry later, he could still block for son-in-law. Fortunately, they had arrived at this moment. If they had arrived a quarter of an hour earlier, they would have seen son-in-law, and that Miss Zuemo flirting. Fong alone would not have been able to block the two misses. At this time, Li Yi also had a little fear in his heart. Fortunately, he did not draw a pig's nose or pig's ears for Lu Rui. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Fong waited for a long time, and did not see any signs of anger from second Mississippi. The expression on his face was as indifferent as ever, as if nothing had happened just now. While he was feeling curious and surprised, Li Yi had already walked forward and said to Lu Rui in confusion, "Wife, why are you here?" "I have nothing to do, so I came here to have a look." Lu Rui smiled. At this time, Xiao Huan came from behind her, and put the food box in her hand on the table. She said, "Miss asked Xiao Huan to make food and bring it over. Son-in-law Uncle Fong's sisters, hurry up and eat while it's hot." The kitchen at the back of the shop could cook, but Li Yi had been busy recently, and had not had time to open a meal. Meals were usually settled at the small stalls outside. There was not much food in the small food box. Of course, it was not enough for the girls, plus Li Yi and Fong. So Fong was sent to buy some food from outside. He closed the shop and moved a table in the yard. The sun was warm, and the breeze was not hurried. Such an atmosphere was suitable for eating. The food that Xiao Huan brought were all ordinary home-cooked dishes. When he opened the food box and smelled the aroma, Li Yi knew that this was not made by Xiao Huan. The little maid's cooking skills were only average. Recently, under his deliberate guidance, she had only improved, but it was not to this extent. He secretly glanced at Lu Rui, but did not expose her. If it was not Xiao Huan, he could ignore the otherworldly Mississippi Lu. She was the only one in the family who could make this kind of food. Today, she and Rui came to Rui's workshop together, which surprised Li Yi. Previously, he had mentioned more than once that if she felt bored in the stronghold, she could manage the business of the shop in the prefectural city. However, Lu Rui seemed to have no interest in this, so Li Yi did not mention it again. Today was this considered the lady boss inspecting the shop? When he and Lu Rui got along, there was always a strange tacit understanding. The two of them did not talk about what had happened before. Apart from not having sex, according to their current lifestyle, there was no difference between them and a real husband and wife. They never blushed or quarreled, which was enough to be called a role model. Thinking of the situation when he first came to this world, he was restless in his room, thinking that he could not keep his chastity. Who would have thought that the person who pushed open the door was actually a beautiful woman? She walked in and said a few words to him. Then, she smashed the wooden table to frighten the two with ulterior motives. Before she left, she turned her head and said faintly, "I Lu Rui." These images appeared in his mind. Thinking of the current situation, Li Yi was surprised to find that the distance between the two of them had unknowingly been shortened by too much. Perhaps one day in the future, when he completely accepted and integrated into this world, between him and her, it might be possible. After the meal, the few young girls excitedly talked about the scene of everyone fighting over Rui's clothes in the morning. The little maid interrupted from time to time. Lu Rui listened with a smile. Fong sat beside Li Yi, trembling with fear. He was always on guard against the second miss who could fly into a rage at any time. Chapter 121. Ningguang Fu did not lack manpower, nor did it lack money. For everything, Little Prince Li Xian only needed to move his mouth, and the people below would naturally take care of it. However, building the workshop, making the distillation equipment, purchasing the raw materials, and giving the workers in the workshop some simple training. These things could not be completed in a day or two, and required at least a few days of preparation. With sufficient funds and manpower, the production of spirits could also be put on the agenda at the same time. Moreover, alcohol distillation only had a simple purification process, which was even simpler than the production of ruidu, but the profits could not be compared. This world also had an incomparably long wine culture. From the nobility to the common people, they all treated it as an important drink in their daily lives. The reason why Li Yi did not release spirits until now was because the cost of this thing was too high. After buying a jar of low alcohol content and distilling it, there would not be much left. Distilling a few large jars of wine into a small jar, although the price would be more expensive than the original, but Li Yi currently did not have much wealth, and could not afford to burn money like this. Li Xian was not the same. He was stupid but had a lot of money, and had a strong background. Even though he was a bit unreliable, but his temperament was still on the same path as Li Yi, and finding him to cooperate with was the most suitable. After eating, Lu Rui did not stay in the shop for long, and left with Xiao Huan and the others. The thing that Fong was worried about did not happen, and Second Miss acted as if nothing had happened. But because of this, his heart was even more perturbed. According to Second Miss's temperament, if she knew that son-in-law actually had improper thoughts about her, son-in-law most likely wouldn't be able to stand here well. But she actually did not have any reaction. Could it be that, between the two of them, there was really some unspeakable secret? Fong felt that he could not continue thinking about it. The implications of this matter were too big, and had already far exceeded the scope of his control. The family matters of son-in-law and eldest miss, it was better to leave it to them. After struggling for a long time, Fong didn't continue to make things difficult for himself. Li Yi didn't know that Fong's thoughts had changed hundreds and thousands of times. It was boring to stay in the yard and bask in the sun all the time. After instructing Fong to look after the shop, he strolled out of the shop slowly. Standing on the street, he heard the faint singing of, "I wish you a long life," thousands of miles apart. Coming from the brothel not far away, Li Yi was stunned and looked over. A moment later, in the brothel next to Rui Square, a young gentleman picked a remote seat and sat down. The singer on the stage was singing Shui Diao Getu in a melodious voice. The young gentleman curled his lips. He could vaguely hear him saying words like, "no authorization and copyright fee." He waved his hand at the shop assistant not far away. "Sir, what do you need?" The waiter hurriedly ran over and asked with a face full of smiles. "Bring a pot of tea." "All right, please wait a moment, the tea will be served soon." The waiter responded, and not long after, the tea was served. Li Yi took a sip of tea. When he looked up again, the singer on the stage had already retreated, and a few women were dancing on the stage. Their sleeves fluttered in the wind, and it was a beautiful sight. Many cheers came from the seats below the stage. When they saw the excitement, they took out a few copper coins and threw them on the stage. The copper coins hit the dancers, but they didn't dodge or dodge. It was as if they were already used to it. Li Yi watched the dance on the stage with great interest. This kind of dance that was filled with the beauty of classical elegance was very pleasing to the eye. At least, in his opinion, it was more than 1,000 times better than the so-called South Korean dances of the future, where people showed their navels and thighs on the stage. It was just that the behavior of the audience below was a little vulgar and spoiled the scene. However, in this era, the status of actors and actresses was extremely low. Although many people liked to watch them perform, deep down, they looked down on these actors and actresses. This was different from the celebrities of the future generations. Everyone was an actor. One was so miserable, while the other was like the moon surrounded by stars. If these seniors knew how the actors of the future generations were treated, would they feel gratified, or would they lament? The brothels here were equivalent to the theaters of the future. They mainly performed plays, songs, and dances. It was one of the few places of entertainment for the people living at the bottom of society. Li Yi also came here to watch the songs and dances, listen to the plays, and experience the entertainment activities of the people of this world. In the past, he naturally had no interest in these things. The entertainment activities of the 21st century were very developed. When he was bored, he could choose to watch movies or surf the internet. Unfortunately, there were only a few forms of entertainment in this world, so he could only make do with it. After paying 10 coins at the door, he could stay here for a day and watch as many programs as he wanted. Of course, other expenses had to be calculated separately. There were about 100 seats in the brothels. At this time, most of them were not full. Li Yi drank a cup of tea for about half an hour. During this time, there were 2 performances of singing and dancing on the stage. One was an opera. The singing and dancing were not bad. As for the opera, it was really a little boring. After a while, Li Yi lost all interest. In his heart, he thought that if there was a chance in the future, he would also open a theater like this and let those singers sing popular songs. Instead of singing, they would not sing those boring plays. They would perform something like The Legend of the White Snake or The Journey to the West. It would be more interesting. The rich seemed to like this. They would buy a few actors and let them perform for them. When they were free, they could also do some unspoken rules. Just thinking about it made people envious. Sister Wan, they are coming down soon. What are you going to sing this time? Immortals at the Magpie Bridge? Behind the stage, a 15 or 16-year-old girl asked the gentlewoman beside her with a flushed face. It's time for Sister Wan to go on stage? Then we'll be able to receive a lot of rewards. Another girl said with a smile. Sister Wan sings well, so they will naturally give you more tips. That girl rolled her eyes at her and looked ahead. She immediately said, They are already done. Sister Wan, hurry up and go up. The sweet-tempered woman smiled and waited for the people who had just finished singing to come out before she slowly walked in. At the same time, Li Yi, who had lost interest in watching anymore, stood up from his seat, paid for the tea and walked out. As soon as he walked out of the door, there was a sudden burst of enthusiastic cheers in the brothels. Li Yi stopped in his tracks. When he was about to look back, he saw a lot of people gathered at the entrance of Rui Workshop, surrounding it and pointing at it. Li Yi frowned slightly and walked over quickly. Chapter 122. Everyone look, my brother used their Rui do to become like this. A tall and skinny young man in the crowd pointed angrily at Rui Workshop and said loudly. Beside him, a young man stood there. His face was swollen, and his eyes had become thin slits. One could vaguely make out his human features. My brother heard that the Rui Workshop sells Rui do that can refresh the mind. He wanted to use some when he was tired from studying. Who would have thought that after using it, he would become like this? The young man's face was full of grief, and his voice was clearly heard by the surrounding crowd. As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding crowd all looked at the young man. Uffed. Someone couldn't help but laugh out loud. This face, it looks like a pig's head, ha ha ha. Ha ha, now that you mention it, it really does look like it. Seeing the young man's swollen head that looked like a pig's head, the crowd automatically ignored what the young man had just said. Even though they knew it was a bit rude, they still couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hearing the laughter around him, the young man's swollen face immediately turned the color of a pig's liver. Ha soy soy pig's head. At this moment, the people who hadn't laughed earlier finally couldn't help but laugh. The angry young man's expression froze on his face. The development of the situation was completely different from what he had imagined. Shouldn't the crowd be pointing their fingers at Rui Workshop and scolding the black-hearted profiteers for selling shoddy goods and scamming customers? How did it turn out like this? Damn it! Who brought up the topic of soy pig's head just now? The young man's throat moved, and he secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then, he gave a few people in the crowd a look. Someone immediately understood what he meant and shouted loudly, "Boycott the profiteers! Boycott Rui do! Black-hearted merchants, drag them to the officials!" A few abrupt voices came from the crowd, but they were quickly drowned out by the crowd's discussion. I heard that Spring Fragrance Restaurant has a new dish recently. Their soy pig's head is really the best in Qing'an Prefecture. Should we go try it another day? Sai, what's so good about soy pig's head? Braised pig's feet are the best. I think pig's ears are delicious. They're perfect to go with wine. A few people in the crowd looked embarrassed. The young man stood at the entrance of Rui Square and opened his mouth in shock, but he couldn't say a word. The young man's face was flushed red. He looked more like a pig's head that had been soaked in soy sauce. What's going on? Who are you people? What are you doing here? All of a sudden, a powerful voice rang out from the front. Everyone's voices stopped abruptly as they turned to look in the direction of the voice. A tall and sturdy man walked out of the shop. When the young man saw that everyone was no longer discussing the matter of the marinated pig head, he was overjoyed. He quickly wiped away his saliva, and a resentful expression immediately appeared on his face. He pointed at the man and said, "It's all because of your Rui Do that my brother has become like this. Today, you must give us an explanation." What? Old Fong looked at the young man beside the young man, and was also shocked. Whose family is this braised pig head? You. Don't even think about changing the topic. The topic of marinated pig head could not be discussed anymore. The young man pointed at Fong and said loudly, "If you can't give me an explanation today, I'll definitely report you to the authorities. Give us an explanation. We can't let this black-hearted shop go. That's right, we can't let them go." Among the crowd, more and more people began to shout along with them under the uproar of a few voices. Those who were watching a good show could never complain about things getting out of hand. After all, the pig head looked delicious, and it looked miserable. Under the influence of sympathy, the balance in everyone's hearts gradually tilted in their favor. Fong's expression was ugly. If that pig head was really caused by Rui Du, then the matter was serious. It would have a serious impact on Rui Du's voice in the future. Behind him, the pretty faces of a few girls turned pale. They also didn't know how to deal with this matter. "Fong, what's the matter?" A familiar voice came from the side. Fong turned his head and looked as if he had seen his savior. He was relieved and said hurriedly, "Young master, you came at the right time. He said that there's a problem with our Rui Du." He pointed at the young man and said, "Young master, look." Li looked in the direction where Fong was pointing and was shocked. "This pig head, how did it become like this? Isn't it because of your Rui Du?" The young man pointed at Li Yi and took out a small porcelain bottle from his pocket. It was the bottle of Rui Du and said angrily. Li looked at the young man, and a trace of suspicion flashed in his eyes. Most of the Rui Du was alcohol. For a small number of people who were allergic to alcohol, it was possible for them to have an allergic reaction, but it was impossible for it to become like this. Moreover, when he was selling the Rui Du, he had already made it clear that there shouldn't be such a serious allergic reaction. Could it be that these guys are here to blackmail me? Li looked at the young man thoughtfully. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the crowd. "Make way, make way!" A few constables in black separated the crowd and walked in. The middle-aged constable who led them said loudly, "What's the matter?" A trace of joy appeared on the young man's face when he saw the constable, and he hurriedly walked over and said, "Constable, my brother used the Rui nectar sold in this shop, and now he has become like this. The evidence is conclusive, and these people still want to deny it. Please uphold justice for us, constable." "Hey, how did it become like this?" The young man's appearance also startled the constable. At this moment, the young man secretly gave him a look. The middle-aged constable's expression didn't change. He waved his hand and said, "If you have any grievances, you can talk about it when we return to the county government. Disperse, disperse." Hearing this, Li Yi's eyes slightly narrowed. Generally speaking, for such a small matter, constables would only suggest the two parties to mediate in private. They wouldn't easily bring it up in court. This young man didn't even mention whether he was willing to mediate or not. But the middle-aged constable couldn't wait to bring them back to the county government. Of course, Li Yi wouldn't believe that there wasn't something fishy going on. Moreover, when he saw the two of them secretly exchanging glances, he coincidentally saw it. Hearing that they were going to the county government, Fong's expression changed slightly. The faces of the girls behind him were even paler. At this moment, Li took a step forward and pointed at the young man. He said, "Constable, before we go to the county government, can I ask him a few questions?" "What questions?" "You'll have the chance to ask him when we get to the county government." The middle-aged constable impatiently waved his hand and said to the young constables, "What are you waiting for? Take them all away." A secret smile appeared on the young man's face. Once they arrived at the county government, he would be the one to decide who was right and who was wrong. The burly man and scholar before him were no different from fish on the chopping board. So what if we let him ask? It won't take much time. At this moment, a faint voice came from outside the crowd. Chapter 123. Although the woman's voice was clear and melodious, it was clearly not what the young man liked to hear. "Who said that?" "The constable is speaking. Is it someone you can interrupt?" The young man turned his head with a dissatisfied expression and looked towards the direction of the voice. The light blue constable uniform that the woman wore was slightly different from the other constables. At this moment, she was standing outside the crowd with her arms crossed in front of her chest and a saber hanging from her waist. Her gaze was indifferent as she looked over. The scene that the young man saw when he turned his head had clearly stunned him. However, at this moment, the middle-aged constable's foot was already flying towards him. "Shut up!" The middle-aged constable's foot caused the young man to stagger. When he raised his head, his face was already filled with a flattering smile. He walked in front of the young woman and asked, "Boss, why are you here?" The young man was momentarily stunned by the inexplicable kick. He didn't understand why the middle-aged constable was acting so crazily. Bringing the shopkeeper of the Rui workshop back to the county office had been personally ordered by the county lieutenant. He was only a lowly constable. Why didn't he listen to the county lieutenant's orders? Of course, he didn't know that the middle-aged constable knew better than anyone else that this young lady was someone who even dared to point at the county magistrate and scold him. Furthermore, even after being scolded, the county magistrate didn't even dare to fart. Compared to the county lieutenant, it was obvious that this young lady who hated evil and couldn't tolerate even the slightest bit of sand in her eyes was much more difficult to deal with. The woman didn't pay attention to the middle-aged constable and glanced at Li Yi as she said indifferently, "What do you want to ask?" "Ask away." "Thank you, constable." Li Yi cupped his hands towards her and thought that the young lady of the Li family was still reasonable. He turned his head to look at the young man whose head was swollen like a pig's and asked, "You said that your pig's head right now is because you used our shop's Rui do?" "Pig's head." The young man didn't expect that this scholar would stab him in the heart as soon as he opened his mouth. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood as he gritted his teeth and said, "Yes." "Do you remember when you bought it?" Li Yi asked again. 3 days ago." The young man answered without hesitation. In his heart, he rejoiced that he had done his homework before coming here. Otherwise, he wouldn't be stumped by this scholar's questions. "Do we buy it directly or through an order?" "Buy it directly." "What was the price of Rui do at that time?" 1 tael of silver per bottle." "Who did you buy it from that day?" "You gave it to me personally." "Do you still remember the time?" "Around c. "How much silver did the instigator give you today?" 10 taels. The speed at which Li Yi asked questions became faster and faster. The young man was already prepared and answered smoothly. He was able to answer subconsciously. He mocked Li Yi in his heart. As early as yesterday, he had begun to prepare for this and had practiced it countless times. There would not be any mistakes. Even if this scholar were to ask another 10 or 8 questions, he would not make any mistakes. Seeing that the scholar had suddenly stopped talking, the young man's lips curled into a smile. He finally gave up. When he turned around, he realized that the crowd around him had quietened down without him noticing. Many of the onlookers began to look at him with a strange expression. The middle-aged constable looked up at the sky, as if there was something in the sky that attracted him. The young man who instructed him to do these things twitched his mouth, and his face was ashen. He thought that he had considered all aspects, but he never thought that he would find such a pig-headed teammate. Seeing the strange expressions of the crowd, the young man was astonished. What was wrong with everyone? "Constable, I have finished my questions." Li once again cupped his hands at the woman, and then stood quietly at the side. Emmingsa turned to look at him. The indifference in her eyes faded and finally, a strange expression appeared. In her mind, she recalled the process of him solving the silver-snatching case, and how he managed to get the truth out of the man's mouth with just a few words. This scholar really did have some ability after all. Haha. At this moment, the crowd could not hold it in any longer and roared with laughter. This person is too stupid. He confessed so easily. So he was ordered by someone to frame someone else. This young master is really smart. With just a few words, he was able to get the truth out of him. Now that the truth was out, the matter was out of the hands of the young man and the middle-aged constable. With a glance from the young woman, the rest of the constables rushed forward and arrested the young man, and the young man whose head was swollen like a pig's. In the crowd, the expressions of a few figures changed, and they quietly retreated. Even though the middle-aged constable had received the order from the magistrate, he did not dare to do anything at this time. Not to mention that there were so many people watching. Even if his superior was present, he could only act impartially. When he turned to look at Li Yifang and the others, he immediately put on a smile and said, "I'm really sorry. I almost fell for these two vile people's tricks and caused you to be wronged." Knowing that the constable did not mean what he said, Li Yi did not expose him. He cupped his fists and said a few polite words as he watched the constables escort the two people away. "Are you interested in becoming a constable?" The young woman crossed her arms and looked at Li Yi with interest. Although there was no shortage of constables in the Yamen, most of them were good-for-nothings. There was a shortage of smart people like her. If he could have such a smart subordinate, it would save him a lot of trouble when investigating cases. Be a constable? Li Yi was stunned for a moment and then shook his head. Although being a constable sounded prestigious, the status of a constable was not high. It could only be considered a temporary job, and the nature of the job was very dangerous. He was not like the young woman in front of him. As a descendant of the royal family, she actually had the interest to be a constable in a small yamen. He did not know if the people above him were out of their minds. Of course, Li Yi was not curious as to whether this princess or princess had the idea of going deep into the grassroots to experience the people's feelings. In any case, he had no interest in being a constable at all. "Are you the shopkeeper of this Rui workshop?" Seeing that Li Yi refused, the young woman did not show any disappointment on her face. She turned to look at the signboard of Rui workshop, threw over a piece of silver, and said, "I've long heard of your Rui dew. I happened to pass by today. Give me a bottle." "I'm sorry, today's Rui dew is sold out." Li Yi regretted giving all the stock to Li Xian just now. He threw the silver back and said, "You don't need the silver. Come and get it tomorrow, when the constable patrols the street." Although Li Yi was not a generous person, he was clear about gratitude and grudges. If she did not give him the chance just now, today's matter might be a little troublesome. It was just a bottle of Rui dew. He was really embarrassed to accept the silver from her. "Well, I'll come again tomorrow." The young woman did not stand on ceremony. After taking back the silver, she waved her hand and said lightly. Then she turned around and disappeared on the street. Li Yi looked at the direction in which she left, and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. In the morning, there was someone who wanted to buy the formula of Rui dew by force. Now there were these two people who were stirring up trouble. It was obvious that they were in cahoots with the middle-aged constable. It seemed that more and more people had their eyes on Rui dew. Chapter 124. Brother-in-law. What if the shopkeeper of the Rui Bazaar refuses to hand over the formula for the Rui dew? What should we do? A young man paced back and forth in a side hall, on the east side of the Yamen of Anshi Prefectural City. He could not help but raise his head and speak to a person sitting in a chair in the hall. A middle-aged man with a gaunt face sat calmly on a wooden armchair facing the door. He had a dignified expression. He raised his teacup and took a sip before saying, "What's the hurry? Bring them back and lock them up in prison for a few days. Let them starve for 3 to 5 days before bringing them up for questioning." The young man was stunned for a moment before an expression of admiration appeared on his face. His brother-in-law was indeed worthy of being the county magistrate. His methods were ruthless. If an ordinary person were to starve in prison for 3 to 5 days, they would not even have the strength to speak. He reckoned that he would not dare to refuse. At that time, he might even be able to save the 1,000 taels of silver. As he thought about the explosive sales of the Rui Du and the huge profits it would bring him, he could not contain his excitement. Just as he was thinking about this, there was movement at the door. The middle-aged constable walked in with his head lowered. "How was it? Did you bring them back?" The young man asked impatiently when he saw the middle-aged constable. The dignified man sitting in the wooden armchair also slowly put down his teacup and looked over. "Sir, I did bring 2 people back, but—" The middle-aged constable bowed to the county magistrate and recounted what had happened with a bitter expression. "What? Constable Lee messed things up?" The young man's face showed a hint of anger when he heard this. He said, "Which Constable Lee? Didn't you tell him that this was the county magistrate's order?" The middle-aged constable looked at him without saying a word, but he secretly criticized in his heart. "That was Constable Lee we were talking about. Even if the county magistrate was involved, what use would it be, let alone a mere county magistrate?" "Constable Lee?" The middle-aged man stood up from his chair with a serious expression on his face. No one knew what he was thinking about. As the county magistrate of Anchi County, he was in charge of arresting thieves and handling cases. Regardless of whether it was constables or constables, they were only his subordinates. However, Constable Lee was an exception. Although he didn't know Arrestor Lee's identity, County Magistrate Liu had specifically warned him not to offend Arrestor Lee on the first day he arrived at the county government. He couldn't afford to offend her. Before that, he had never heard of any woman who could be a constable. However, even though he was full of doubts, County Magistrate Liu did not reveal more things to him. Since then, he had always turned a blind eye to the behavior of this female constable. Fortunately, although the other party abhorred evil and always intervened whenever he encountered injustice, making the county government prison unprecedentedly lively, other than that, he did not cause much trouble to him. He turned to look at the middle-aged constable and asked with a frown, "Constable Lee knows that innkeeper?" "I don't think so," the middle-aged constable said after giving it some thought. He was very familiar with Constable Lee's meddlesome character. This time, it must have been a coincidence. "Let's talk about this matter later." The middle-aged man thought for a moment before he lightly said. He then lifted his foot and stepped out of the door. "Brother-in-law." The young man chased after him for 2 steps. Seeing him waving his hand impatiently behind him, he finally stopped. A trace of anger appeared on his face. When he received benefits, he was so straightforward, but when he needed him to do something, he always shirked the responsibility. As a county magistrate, he was actually afraid of a constable under his command. If he had known this, he would not have come to this cheap brother-in-law. He held a small porcelain bottle tightly in his hand, and his eyes were burning. No matter what, he was determined to get the formula of Rui Du. After experiencing 2 small twists and turns yesterday, when Li stayed in the shop, he always felt that there were several pairs of eyes staring at him in the dark. Just thinking about it made him uncomfortable. This should be regarded as obsessive-compulsive disorder, which was incurable. He decided that after returning to the Stockade Village today, he would rest for a few days. When Prince Ning Mansion settled everything, and the shop in the city opened, no one would dare to have any ideas about Rui Du anymore. Of course, with so many orders previously, the Rui Du still had to be opened every day. However, it was only for customers to pick up the goods according to their orders in the morning, and the shop would not continue to sell it. From a certain point of view, this could be considered hunger marketing. When those shops opened in a few days, the young masters and ladies who didn't manage to buy the Rui Du would probably trample the doors of the shops until they broke. Today, there were only him and Fong in the shop. These days, Li was tired of eating outside noodle stalls, so he simply cleaned up the kitchen at the back of the shop and cooked for himself. He bought some eggs and sesame oil. The rice was egg-fried rice, which was simple and convenient. Speaking of which, he had not eaten it for a long time. Although he did not particularly like to eat it before, he still missed it a little at this time. Sitting in the shop, Fong smelled the fragrance coming from the backyard. His throat involuntarily moved twice, and from time to time, he glanced in the direction of the kitchen. The shock in his heart was indescribable. It was not unusual for the men in the stockade to know how to cook, but if this person was the son-in-law, then it was very unusual. Moreover, just smelling the fragrance made him salivate. If his wife had such cooking skills, Fong was afraid that he would wake up every night laughing in his dreams. After a while, Li Yi served the egg-fried rice on 2 plates. Among the white rice grains, the golden eggs were vaguely visible, and the fragrance assailed his nostrils. In this era where cooking was the mainstream, it was the first time that Fong had seen such a legendary dish as egg-fried rice. Son-in-law, is this edible? Fong raised his head and looked at Li Yi with some suspicion. Li Yi glanced at him and ignored Fong. He minded his own business and tasted it with a spoon. Although his cooking was not as good as his mother's, it was still not bad. With Li Yi testing the poison first and not showing any strange expression on his face, Fong immediately felt relieved. He found a small jar of wine from the counter and returned to the dining table. Li Yi raised his head and glanced at him. This guy actually dared to eat egg-fried rice with wine. He did not know if there were others who did this later, but it was definitely unprecedented. Learning from Li Yi, Fong tasted it with a spoon. A satisfied expression immediately appeared on his face. Delicious. It was really King delicious. When he went back, he must let his wife learn from him. A woman's cooking was actually not as delicious as the son-in-law's cooking. Even if she did not find it embarrassing, he would feel ashamed for her. With this in mind, when he reached for the jar of wine, a figure walked in from outside. Chapter 125. A woman in a light blue constable uniform walked into the shop. Fong's hand, which was reaching for the wine jar, paused. He was stunned for a moment, and then turned to look at Li Yi. Li Yi was actually waiting for the female constable to take the ruidu. Then he could close the shop and go back to the stockade village. He was thinking that if she didn't come back by the time he finished his meal, he would send someone to send her to the county government office. Now he could save himself the trouble. Putting down the spoon in his hand, he stood up and took out the ruidu that had been prepared for her. When he handed it to her, he subconsciously said politely, "Have you eaten yet, constable? How about having a meal here before you leave?" Whether in the original world or now, this sentence was a very common greeting. Food was the most important thing for people. Whether they could fill their stomachs was related to their survival. It was also the most important issue for people in the ancient times and now. Therefore, when they met, people often asked, "Have you eaten?" Or, "Do you want to have a meal at home?" to show their concern for the other party. Over time, it became a conventional greeting, and gradually became the most common greeting when people met each other. The standard answer to this greeting was, "Thank you, I have eaten." The two exchanged a few more polite words, and then parted. One was enthusiastic, and the other was polite. Both the host and the guests were happy. Li Yi was waiting for the female constable to decline and leave so that he could finish his meal and go home quickly. Seeing that she didn't respond for a long time, he raised his head and saw that she was looking at the egg-fried rice on the table. The next moment, she turned to look at him and said lightly, "All right." The smile on Li Yi's face froze. He felt like he had shot himself in the foot. The female constable's unconventional behavior made him unable to react for a moment. He was stunned for a while and then said, "Then have a seat first. I'll go get you some rice." After all, she had done him a favor twice. Li Yi wouldn't be so stingy that he couldn't even afford to treat her to a bowl of egg-fried rice. After a short moment of surprise, he turned around and walked towards the direction of the kitchen. The female constable walked to the table and put her knife aside. She sat down casually and looked at the egg-fried rice on the plate. A rare look of doubt appeared in her eyes. Ever since she was young, she had tasted delicacies from delicacies to street food. But this was the first time she had seen this kind of food. Just by smelling this unique fragrance, her appetite was aroused. Ever since the female constable sat across from him, old Fong started to feel a little uneasy. One of the reasons was due to her identity, but the other reason was the pressure he felt from her. This female officer was an expert. Old Fong knew very well that he wouldn't be able to defeat someone who could make him feel this way if they were to really fight. Wine. The female constable's beautiful eyes lit up when she saw the wine jar on the table. She reached out and took the wine jar. After opening it, the fragrance of the wine flowed out. A trace of surprise appeared on her face. She picked up the wine jar and took a big gulp. A blush appeared on her pretty face. She wiped the corner of her mouth and couldn't help but exclaim, "Good wine!" When Li walked into the shop with a plate of egg-fried rice, he saw such a scene. It seemed that regardless of gender or alcohol tolerance, the old Li family loved good wine. This female constable was usually like Lu Rui, always with a cold and unapproachable face. After seeing good wine, she immediately changed her attitude. "Where did you buy this wine?" The female constable put down the wine jar and looked up at Li. "I brewed it myself." Li placed the egg-fried rice on the table in front of her, sat back in his seat, and started to eat. The wine she drank just now had been distilled a few times. It should be around 40% alcohol. Fong had a headache for 2 days and hadn't touched wine for a long time. He had only recovered recently. However, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to drink this wine today. Without waiting for the female constable to speak again, he continued, "If you want to buy it, you can wait for a few days. This wine will be sold in the Rui workshop." Hearing this, the female constable didn't ask any more questions. After taking another sip of wine, she put the wine jar beside her and tasted the egg-fried rice. Her beautiful eyes lit up again. She raised her head and looked at Li in surprise. Whether it was the Rui dew, the strong wine, the weird painting on the wall, or the food that she had never seen before, this scholar had a lot of weird things around him. Fong didn't enjoy his meal to his heart's content. He met the female constable who ate for free. The wine that he got from his son-in-law with great difficulty was taken by her, and she had no intention of returning it. The food that was supposed to be for 2 people was divided by her. Fong wasn't full either and felt depressed. He didn't even have the taste of the food. After eating and drinking, the female constable went to patrol the streets as usual. Her alcohol tolerance was not bad. Even Fong couldn't compare to her. She drank all the wine in the small jar, and her expression didn't change. She was supposed to patrol the streets. There might not be a rule in the Jing Kingdom that forbade constables from patrolling the streets after drinking. However, this wasn't something that Li could worry about. After buying some things on the streets, she closed the shop with Fong and rented a horse carriage from a carriage shop not far from the shop. Then, she slowly drove out of the mansion. After returning to the stockade village and passing by the school, Li stood outside the door and listened for a while. Qin Qing was teaching the naughty brats to memorize rules for a disciple. Education had to start from when they were young. Although he didn't know what kind of path they would take in the future, it was worth it to do something for these children after being stared at by so many pairs of admiring eyes for so long, and hearing them call him Mr. from the bottom of their hearts. Rules for a Disciple was the introductory reading material that Li had chosen for the naughty brats. The rhythm was catchy, and the words were easy to read. It was close to the vernacular. While they were learning how to write, they could also learn the principles of how to conduct oneself, as well as all kinds of common sense and etiquette. The naughty brats were still young, so it was important to cultivate good values. In order to prevent them from becoming like their parents when they grew up, they had to be taught these correct values from a young age. In order to make it more interesting, Li made all the original allusions in the rules for a disciple into short stories. Every day, he would let Qin Qing teach a few sentences to the naughty brats. Then he would intersperse them with a few stories, such as getting rid of evil, fighting tigers, and fighting dragons. The naughty brats loved to listen to these kinds of stories, so they would remember them more firmly. Of course, even in this era of feudal orthodoxy, Li still didn't want the naughty brats to grow up to become stupid, loyal, and filial people. What he taught them had been greatly edited and modified to conform to the mainstream Confucian ideology of this era, but it wouldn't severely suppress the naughty brats' nature. After listening for a while outside the school, the naughty brats were all very obedient. When Qin Qing read a sentence, they would read a sentence. The school was orderly, no different from when he was here. Afterwards, he went to the workshop to take a look. The daily demand for Ruidu was not small, but there was a limited amount of manpower in the stockade. Everyone was working against time. Fortunately, this situation wouldn't last for long. In the next 2 days, Li Xian would send someone over to observe and learn the distillation method. After a few days, Ning Wangfu's shop would open for business, and the pressure here would be reduced to the minimum. Chapter 126. In the morning, he sent someone to deliver Rui Lu to the shop, and Li Yi could enjoy his vacation. The weather was good today. It was early autumn, and the leaves had not fallen yet. There was not much of a bleak feeling on the mountain. The shouts of the naughty children filled the gentle grassy slope. As a teacher, Qin Qing was much more responsible than Li Yi. She taught seriously every day. It was rare for the naughty children to have a day of extracurricular activities. They ran happily on a small grassy slope by the stream, revealing their lively nature. Qin Qing stood not far away and smiled as she watched the naughty children. After spending time with them, her impression of the naughty and mischievous children had greatly changed. They now truly looked like a female teacher. Not far away from her, Lu Xiaohu was playing a role-playing game with a group of boys. He liked to play the role of Sun Wukong the most. He brandished a wooden stick with great vigor. The other naughty children watched from the side, their eyes filled with envy. According to the story of Journey to the West, the chubby naughty child who played the role of Buddha was supposed to subdue him and press him under the five-finger mountain. However, when he saw how powerful the stick was, he immediately hid far away and did not dare to get close. Xiaohu, be careful. Don't hit the others. Qin Qing warned him from afar. Lu Xiaohu responded, threw down the stick, and ran away with the naughty children. About 100 feet up the grassy slope, Li Yi had already used a bamboo stick to skewer the meat, brushed it with sauce, and placed it on an iron rack. Below the rack was a burning charcoal fire. The fragrance of roasted meat spread everywhere. Not far away, Fong, who was roasting fish caught from the stream on the fire with a few men, silently swallowed a mouthful of saliva. He decisively handed the fat fish he had just skewered to someone else, ran to Li Yi's side and sat down. He gave Li Yi a silly smile and stared at the roasting rack, unwilling to move his eyes away. Further away, the women of the village gathered together and laughed. After a while, Xiaohuan ran over and ran to Li Yi's side. In a soft voice she said, "Young master, the second miss asked if the meat is ready. Let her wait a little longer." Li Yi poked at the charcoal fire with a wooden stick. Haste makes waste. Roasting meat required patience. Mississippi Lu, on the other hand, was free. All she needed to do was to open her mouth. Li Yi himself, on the other hand, had become a free roaster. "Oh," the young maidservant replied. Just as she was about to run over, Lu Xiaohu and a group of naughty children ran over excitedly. Sir. Lu Xiaohu handed over a small white thing in his hand and said, Sir, we just caught a rabbit. Sir, please roast it." When Fong saw the rabbit, his eyes lit up. Rabbit meat was tender and delicious. In the past, when he was a teenager like this, he had secretly roasted it many times. However, there was one time when he accidentally burned his clothes. When he returned home, his parents pressed him down on the Kong bed and gave him a good spanking. Since then, he hadn't eaten it again. Li Yi took the rabbit that was not much bigger than his palm. This rabbit didn't seem to have much meat. Roasting it wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. Furthermore, it was such a white and soft little thing. He really couldn't bear to do it. At this time, he felt someone tugging on his sleeve. He turned his head and saw that the young maidservant's eyes were full of pleading. "Young master, don't eat this little rabbit, okay?" Li Yi had never been immune to the young maidservant's coquettish attacks. He stuffed the rabbit into her arms and said, All right. I won't eat it. You can take it and play with it." The young maidservant carried the rabbit away happily. Fong's face revealed a regretful expression. Rabbit meat was really delicious. "Excuse me, where does Li Yi live?" In the Willow Leaf village, a young and handsome man stopped a villager and asked, "Who are you people?" The man looked at these strangers and asked with a vigilant face. The village was isolated from the outside world. On normal days, outsiders would rarely come here. This young man was dressed luxuriously and had an extraordinary temperament. The men behind him had weapons on their waists. At first glance, one could tell that they were not ordinary people. Why did these people appear in the village? Don't be nervous. I am Li Yi's friend. I have something to discuss with him, the young man said with a smile. The man looked suspiciously at the handsome young man in front of him. Seeing that he didn't seem to have any evil intentions, he pointed to the front and said, "The young master is not at home right now. Walk along this road. After about a quarter of an hour, you will see a small stream. You can find him there." "Thank you." The young man cupped his hands and led the few people to walk in the direction pointed by the man. The man looked at the backs of the few people walking away. He scratched his head and turned to do his own things. Regardless of the purpose of these strangers, they couldn't delay the young master's business. If they didn't have evil intentions, it would be fine. But if they had bad intentions, they would be seeking death in their own territory. "Young master, slow down, slow down." A middle-aged fat man followed behind the young man with his forehead full of sweat. After walking such a long mountain road, it was a little hard for him to bear with his physical strength. The fat man's surname was Wang. He was a housekeeper of Ningguang Fu. He single-handedly managed the outside business of the Wang Fu. This time, he came with the young master to discuss the cooperation of Rui Lu. This housekeeper Wang had long heard of the Rui Lu that had become popular in Qing, and recently, this was an elegant business and was suitable for Ningguang Fu. He had been thinking about when to ask his superiors if he should intervene in this business. However, he hadn't thought that this young master, who idled around all day and did nothing but work, would also take care of these matters. He immediately had him build a workshop and arrange for people. After a series of orders, the housekeeper was slightly dumbfounded. This was a good thing for the Wang Fu. After all, no matter if it was a commoner or a noble, no one would say no to money. Especially when he saw the strong wine that the young master took out. Housekeeper Wang's eyes began to shine. This wasn't strong wine. This was clearly shining silver. However, the workshop was built in the Wang Fu. The people were provided by the Wang Fu, and the goods were sold by the Wang Fu. In the end, the profits had to be split 50-50. In this world, no one dared to do business with Ningguang Fu like this. The young master didn't understand these things and casually agreed. He turned his head and ordered the servants of the Wang Fu to do it. However, as the housekeeper of the Wang Fu, he had to maximize the profits of the Wang Fu. He couldn't agree to such an absurd method of distribution. The reason why housekeeper Wang insisted on coming this time was because of this matter. He really wanted to see who had the guts to even dare to take advantage of Ningguang Fu. By the stream, Feng didn't know how much saliva he swallowed. Just as he was about to take the first skewer of meat that Li Yi handed over to him, a slender white hand suddenly appeared and snatched the meat skewer before he could. Under Feng's stunned gaze, the handsome young master bit into the meat skewer. There was a surprised expression on his face as he praised, "Delicious." Chapter 127. Feng stared blankly at the handsome young master, eating with his mouth full of oil and a satisfied expression. He felt a burst of anger in his heart and stood up with a whoosh. It was fine that the female constable snatched his wine. After all, the other party's identity was there, and he couldn't beat her. The first batch of meat roasted by the young master was sent to the ladies. Eldest Miss and Second Miss were there, so it was fine for him to wait a little longer. However, even this gigolo dared to snatch the roasted meat that he had been craving for a long time. Feng couldn't stay calm. If this gigolo didn't know the young master, he would have slapped him. At the same time he stood up, the men behind Li Xian also stood up. Their aura was equal to Feng's. However, other than looking at each other affectionately again, they didn't do anything extreme. It wasn't the first time they had dealt with each other. The guards knew that this man wouldn't do anything to the young master. Feng also knew the background of these guys. The reason why he didn't make a move was mainly because the other party had more people, and he was afraid that he would be at a disadvantage. On the other side, seeing that there were a few unfamiliar people who came to the young master's place and seemed to have a conflict with Fong, the men who were roasting fish not far away immediately stood up and walked over quickly. "You guys go over there and wait. Don't spoil the mood." Li Xian waved his hand at the guards and found a clean stone. He sat opposite Li Yi and watched Li Yi turn the iron frame on the charcoal fire. He couldn't help but say, "This roasting method is rare. Even the old royal chefs in the prince's residence can't make it taste as good as this." There was no technical difficulty in roasting meat. Whether the roasted meat tasted good or not mainly depended on the sauce. This was a secret recipe that Li Yi had found after flipping through dozens of cookbooks. Although the taste was slightly reduced because of the lack of a few seasonings, it was still considered a rare delicacy in this world. If you want to eat it, roast it yourself. Li Yi saw that his eyes were fixed on the roasted meat in his hands and handed some to him. Li Xian was actually eager to try. After taking it, he imitated what Li Yi did and brushed a layer of sauce on it. Then, he put the meat skewers on the charcoal fire and slowly turned them. There were light footsteps behind him. Rui walked over and looked at the young man sitting opposite Li Yi. She asked, "Husband, this is..." "Husband." Li Xian raised his head to look at the elegant woman. Beside her was the woman who had been by Li Yi's side in Qing'an Prefecture. She seemed to be his wife's sister. The sisters were so beautiful. She turned to look at Li Yi with an envious expression. This was the blessing of having two wives. TSK. Li Yi stood up and briefly introduced Li Xian to Rui. He only said that Li Xian was from Qing'an Prefecture and was a business partner of his. As for his identity, he didn't reveal it. "Hello, madam." Li Xian didn't treat himself as a prince at all. He stood up and bowed with his hands clasped in a very thorough manner. Rui never asked too much about business matters. She just greeted him out of courtesy and walked over to the woman's side. "Sun Wukong, I'm calling you. Do you dare to answer?" On a grassy slope not far away, a certain mischievous child raised his gourd and shouted. Lu Xiaohu didn't wave his rod again. This time, it was the scene of Sun Wukong teasing the silver-horned king. Li Xian listened with interest. After roasting the meat, he stood up and ate as he walked over to the mischievous child. As he left, he pointed at the fat middle-aged man beside him and said, "Oh right, this is housekeeper Wang. He has always been in charge of our business outside. You can discuss with him how to operate the Rui Du and liquor business." "Housekeeper Wang, want some roasted meat?" Li put down the things in his hands and looked up at the shrewd-looking fat man. He extended his hand and handed over a roasted meat skewer. "No, let's talk about cooperation first." As housekeeper Wang spoke, he smelled the fragrance of the meat and couldn't help but salivate. He subconsciously reached out and took a bite. It's crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It's fragrant and tempting. It's really delicious. At this moment, housekeeper Wang had really forgotten about his business and couldn't help but praise. He was a glutton himself. Normally, he wouldn't be happy without meat. That was why he was so fat. As the housekeeper of the Wang residence, he had eaten many delicacies. In terms of taste, the skewer in his hand could be ranked at the top. After a while, housekeeper Wang threw the skewer to the side and wiped his mouth before speaking again. "The Rui Du business. How about another skewer?" Looking at the meat skewer that Li Yi handed over, housekeeper Wang swallowed his saliva. He stopped mid-sentence and extended his chubby hand again. With his usual appetite, this little bit was really not enough. After eating a few skewers of roasted meat and drinking 2 bowls of the rice wine that Li Yi brewed, housekeeper Wang sat beside Li Yi and patted his stomach with a satisfied expression. Rubbing his stomach, he said, "We've eaten and drank. Thank you, Li brothers, for your hospitality. Let's talk about doing business together first. The Wang residence will provide manpower, build the workshop and rent the shops. When the time comes, we still have to arrange for people to produce and sell. Isn't it a bit inappropriate to split the profits 50-50? Then what does housekeeper Wang mean?" Li looked at him and asked. 370, housekeeper Wang said after some thought. He had actually been very considerate of Li Yi with this distribution ratio. In the prefectural city, The merchants that worked with Ning Wangfu all saw this giant umbrella of protection. After all, if they could form a relationship with the Wangfu, as long as they followed the rules and did their business in the prefectural city, they wouldn't encounter any trouble. Of course, their investment was also great. The Wangfu wouldn't manage many things, but they would take 70% of the profits. This time, the Wangfu needed to build the workshop, rent the shops, and arrange manpower. He only contributed a secret recipe. Only taking 70% of the profits was already very considerate of him. If the other wasn't a friend of the young prince, and had treated him to a delicious roasted meat, giving him 20% of the profits was already very generous. 370. Li Yi stilled and then said with an embarrassed expression, "How can I accept that? The Wangfu has done so much. I feel bad for only taking 30% of the profits. How about 40 and 60? Raising his head, he saw Li Yi's righteous expression, as though he was giving up a great profit. Housekeeper Wang was stunned. It was like 10,000 horses galloped through his heart. Chapter 128. Ahem, Li brothers have misunderstood. Housekeeper Wang coughed dryly to hide the awkwardness on his face. Of course, the manor takes 7. All of Ning Wang's businesses outside were managed by housekeeper Wang alone. In Qing'an, he was a person of status. If anyone else dared to speak to him like this, housekeeper Wang would have stormed off in a huff. However, the person in front of him was an exception. The cooperation in the business of ruidu and hard liquor had already become a foregone conclusion. This was not something that housekeeper Wang could change. After all, this matter was decided by the little prince. He was only a servant in Ning Wang Manor. At most, he was a servant with a slightly higher status. He had no right to veto. Furthermore, the profits of these two businesses were so large that they were guaranteed to be profitable. Each year, they could bring in large profits for the manor. If they succeeded, he would have a part of the credit. All he could do was try his best to earn as much profit as possible for the manor. The little prince could not personally ask about these matters. The little prince didn't know anything, so he had to do these things. Housekeeper Wang, you are wrong. Li Yi sighed and looked at him leisurely. Presumably, housekeeper Wang is an understanding person. You should know how much profit the ruidu and hard liquor can bring once they are mass-produced, right? He could not deny this. Housekeeper Wang nodded and said, Ruidu is indeed a wondrous item. It is popular in Qing'an. If production can be increased, it can even be sold to Jingdo. As for the hard liquor, it is far better than anything else in the wine shop. The profit is immeasurable. Li looked at him and asked with a smile. Then, has housekeeper Wang ever heard of intellectual property? Intellectual property? Confusion appeared on housekeeper Wang's face, and he couldn't help but ask, what is intellectual property? It was not an easy matter to explain what intellectual property was to an antique from hundreds or thousands of years ago. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, although the profit from ruidu and hard liquor is great, without the recipe for ruidu and the method to produce the hard liquor, no matter how great the profit, it is just empty talk. Housekeeper Wang cannot deny this? Of course, Steward Wang answered without hesitation. In Butler Wang's opinion, are these two things more important, or are the manpower and workshop more important? Li looked at him and asked. Steward Wang stopped talking. Of course, he understood that it was useless to have the manpower and workshop without the formula. The premise for the prince's mansion to obtain such a huge profit was that the young man in front of him could give them the formula of the ruidu and the method of producing spirits. But the problem was, would anyone dare to negotiate with the Wang family like this? As it turned out, there really was. For a long time, those merchants had been trying to curry favor with him and establish a relationship with the prince's mansion. Why was everything reversed when it came to him? Housekeeper Wang's expression was a little ugly. It seemed that the other party was determined not to give up any profits. Moreover, regarding this matter, he could not use any means of coercion. After all, the young prince seemed to value him very much. Seeing the displeasure on housekeeper Wang's face, Li opened his mouth again and said, Ruidu and spirits are just the beginning. The perfume and soap that the Rui workshop is about to release will be more profitable than the spirits. Regardless of ancient times or modern times, women's money was the easiest to earn. A small bottle of Rui dew could make them like this. If the perfume and soap were to be released, how crazy would they be? Are you serious? Housekeeper Wang raised his head and looked at Li Yi with a fiery gaze. The profits from the spirits had already made him extremely satisfied. If there was a business that was more profitable than this, it would definitely be a great contribution. Perhaps with these contributions, he could be promoted to the prince's mansion's chief steward in his lifetime and reach the peak of his life. Li Yi looked at housekeeper Wang and smiled without saying a word. Fine, 50% it is. After thinking for a long time, housekeeper Wang finally squeezed out these two words from between his teeth. In the happy and harmonious atmosphere, the two finally decided on the final method of splitting the profits. It was still 50%. However, Li Yi had to guarantee that if there was anything new in the future, he would first consider working with Ning Wangfu. Towards this, Li Yi naturally agreed. With such a thick thigh, would he be stupid not to cling to it? The negotiation ended happily like this. Li Yi's heart relaxed a lot. He looked around and found that there were many people gathered at the grassy slope. He slowly walked over. Housekeeper Wang stood where he was, his emotions complicated. After a long time, he sighed and sat down on the ground. He picked up a few skewers of meat, brushed them with sauce, and began to roast them over the fire. A few steps away from him, the naughty children formed a long line. They clasped their hands behind their backs and shook their heads. One by one, they walked in front of Qin Qing and recited the lessons that the teacher had taught them a few days ago. The rules of the disciples, the teachings of the saints. The first is filial piety. The second is honesty. Love the masses, be kind, and if you have spare energy, learn literature. The endless noises made housekeeper Wang annoyed. After the naughty brats recited it, even he, who was listening at the side, could recite more than 10 sentences. He couldn't help but shake his head and focus his attention on the delicacies in front of him again. On the flat ground under the grassy slope, two figures were moving quickly. Previously, he lost to Fong in strength, so the guard leader was not satisfied. Now that he saw him again, he naturally had to get back at him. Of course, he wouldn't be stupid enough to continue to compete with Fong in strength. This time, the two were competing in fist and leg skills. When Li Yi walked to the side of the field, they were still locked in combat. As the guard leader, his skills were naturally not bad. However, Fong wasn't someone to be trifled with. From the looks of it, the two of them wouldn't be able to determine the winner in a short period of time. On the other side, Li Xian was still holding a piece of roasted meat in his hand. His eyes stared at the rabbit in Xiao Huan's arms, and his face revealed an expression of desire. He didn't know how this rabbit would taste when roasted, but from the looks of it, it should taste pretty good. Xiao Huan felt his malicious gaze, and immediately dodged a few steps to the side. Little servant girl, how about I use this ingot of silver to buy your rabbit? Li Xian took out a silver ingot, and looked at the little servant girl as he asked. The little maidservant knew that he definitely didn't have good intentions in wanting this rabbit, but money was also very attractive to her. Although the son-in-law would usually buy her anything she wanted, she also wanted to save some money for her own use. As if thinking of something, the little servant girl's face revealed a trace of craftiness. She passed the rabbit to a sister beside her, picked up 2 stones, one big and one small, and held them in her hands. She raised her arms to the same height with her palms facing down, looked at him and said in a soft voice, "If you can guess which stone will fall first after I let go, I will give you the rabbit. If you guess wrong, you have to lose the silver to me." Li Xian was stunned for a moment. Then, he couldn't help but feel that it was a pity. This little girl looked quite clever, but he didn't expect her to be so stupid. Such a simple question. Did she even need to guess? Chapter 129. Li Xian was a little hesitant at this moment. Making a bet that he would definitely win with the silly servant girl was really bullying, and did not match his status as an heir. However, once the idea of roasting the rabbit appeared, he could not get rid of it. Just thinking about it made his mouth salivate. Li Xian thought about it and said, "How about this? If I lose, I'll give you this ingot of silver. If I win, give me the rabbit and the silver is still yours." With an ingot of silver as compensation, he wouldn't have any psychological pressure if he won the rabbit. "If I lose, I lose. If I lose, I'll give you the rabbit, no silver." The servant girl did not agree to Li Xian's suggestion. Since it was a bet, it had to be fair. However, she was laughing in her heart. The last time son-in-law made a bet with second young miss, and Xiao Huan were fooled. This young master looked dumb and definitely wasn't as smart as son-in-law. "Then it's up to you. I guess this piece will fall first." Li Xian waved his hand and did not insist. He pointed at the slightly larger stone in the servant girl's hand. Just as he was thinking which part of the rabbit meat was the most delicious, the servant girl let go. Dong! The stone fell on the grass and made a slightly dull sound. There was only one sound from the two stones. Watching the obviously large and small stones fall at the same time, the expression on Li Xian's face froze. In the end, he revealed an expression, as if he had seen a ghost. Things seemed to be a little different from what he had imagined. Li Xian, who didn't believe it, personally picked up the two stones from the ground and imitated the maidservant. He raised them to a certain height and let go. The two stones fell to the ground at the same time, and there was a loud thud. With a face full of doubt and disbelief, he ran to the side and picked up the two stones again. A person's view of the world might need several years, or even decades. But to destroy it, it only needed an instant. It was very obvious that the servant girl had used two stones to make the dignified air of Ning Wang doubt this world. It also made him feel a strong suppression of his intelligence. "Su Jia, Wang Zhong, you two come over," he shouted loudly to the side. The two guards who were watching the fight between Fong and the leader of the guards quickly ran over. Young master, what can I do for you?" "You two take these two stones and climb up that tree." Li watched from afar as the two pitiful guards acted as experimenters. They released their hands from different heights, allowing the two stones to fall. The expression on Li Xian's face changed from disbelief to shock. He seemed to have lost his wits. He shook his head in amusement. The density of the stone was not small. Falling from a height of at most 10 feet, the resistance was almost negligible. Even if he was blind, he would not be able to see the obvious difference. "Why?" After a while, Li Xian walked to his side in a daze and murmured, "Unexpected, really unexpected. Why did the small stone fall together with the big stone? This doesn't make sense." At this time, he had already forgotten about the matter of roasting the rabbit. His mind was already filled with countless stones. There are many unexpected things in this world. Not everything goes as you imagine. For example, Li looked at him and let out a long sigh. Thinking that he was going to explain, Li Xian suddenly raised his head and looked at him. "For example, you thought I was going to give you an example." Li patted his shoulder and said earnestly, this young man was still too young. In the early years of Jinghe, in the Willow Leaf Village, a 16-year-old servant girl used two small stones to overturn the daily knowledge of the predecessors. She created a scientific method to study the laws of nature, and at the same time, she started the world's study of free fall. This spirit of daring to question and experiment inspired countless people and promoted the development of science. Until hundreds and thousands of years later, it still had a lot of inspiration to the world and was named one of the most beautiful physics experiments. The law of nature that objects of different mass fall at the same speed was also officially named law of small loop. Xiao Huan imperceptibly created a little trouble for Li Yi. Li Xian was obviously not satisfied without an answer. With his character that was bursting with curiosity, if he kept thinking about this matter, he might end up depressed. But it was obviously impossible to explain to him clearly. Li Xian, who had no foundation in physics, would definitely be more confused when he heard the words gravity and acceleration of gravity. This method did not work, so he had to find another way. So Li Yi tried to make him understand that there were many things in life that could not be explained. After a while, Li Xian really did not dwell on the problem of the stones falling to the ground. Why does the river always flow from the top to the bottom? Why do the leaves on the trees always fall to the ground and not fly to the sky? Why can I see my own shadow in the water? Why? Under the guidance of Li Yi, he began to struggle with these things. Li Yi felt that when he had time in the future, he should write a book called 100,000 Whys. It would definitely sell well, and at the same time, it could also open people's minds. If that was really the case, perhaps in the future, the discovery of important laws in physics would not be related to Newton and Galileo. At this world, it seems like there is no such thing. However, after thinking about it carefully, he still dispelled this idea. If he told them that the ground under their feet was actually a big ball, they would probably be tied to a pillar and burned to death as heretics before they could even sell well. Even if they were to be rehabilitated, it would be thousands of years later. Li Xian and the others did not come here today to throw stones for fun. They came to observe the workshop and learn the production methods of ruidu and spirits. If it was someone else, Li Yi would definitely not do this. It was best to firmly grasp this kind of core technology in his own hands. Even if there was a shortage of manpower and the production was a little lower, it could ensure that the business would continue to be stable. If the other party got the formula and distillation method, they would turn against him. Then he would suffer a great loss. However, first of all, Li Yi still trusted this unreliable young prince very much. Second, if he did not cooperate with others, he would lose this cake sooner or later. This was also something that he had no other choice. If he cooperated with the Wang family, he did not have to worry about the secret formula being leaked. He believed that in this aspect, housekeeper Wang could do better than him. After seeing the workshop that produced ruidu, housekeeper Wang began to feel a little unbalanced in his heart. Such a simple thing forcibly took away 50% of the Wang family's profits. As long as he thought about this matter, his heart would bleed. However, such an extremely simple thing, since ancient times, no one had thought of it. Housekeeper Wang sighed, thinking about the perfume and soap in the future, which would be even more profitable. He felt a little better in his heart. He wanted to ask the young prince for his opinion. When he turned his head, he saw Li Xian with a puzzled face. He looked up at the sky and muttered to himself, "Why is it like this?" Chapter 130. Li Xian didn't dare to ask Li Yi the reason why the stone fell to the ground. Just now, when he insisted on asking for an answer, Li Yi asked him another question. Was the sun in the morning or at noon closer to people? Li Xian thought it was morning because the sun looked as big as a disk in the morning, but at noon, it would be much smaller. Everyone understood this principle, but when Li Yi threw out the theory that it was cold in the distance and hot in the near, Li Xian began to feel that his brain wasn't enough. Today he had suffered enough blows. He was of noble birth and had received a good education since he was young. Among his teachers, which one of them wasn't a knowledgeable scholar? But today, he discovered that he couldn't even compare to a little servant girl. If Li Yi threw a few more questions at him, Li Xian felt that he would go crazy. I know. The speed at which an object falls has nothing to do with its weight. If a heavy object and a light object fall from the same height, they must fall at the same time. Unsure of the reason, Li Xian decided to force himself to remember. Is it really like this? Li Yi glanced at him, picked up a leaf and a stone from the ground, and raised them to the same height again. Guess between the leaf and the stone which will fall first. When the guards beside Li Xian saw this, they looked at each other, and saw a trace of inexplicability in each other's eyes. Was there a need to guess? It must be the stone falling first. The little prince wasn't stupid. How could he not even guess this kind of question? In fact, Li Xian's first feeling was that the stone would fall first. But before he said it, he began to hesitate again. After experiencing a lot of blows, he would no longer rely on his own ideas and assumptions. Seeing is believing. Before this, didn't he also think that the big stone would fall first? What's more, how could Li Yi ask him such a simple question? Obviously, Li Yi, who had become the smartest person in his heart, wouldn't ask such a stupid question. Don't try to deceive me a second time. The leaf and the stone will fall at the same time. Li Xian had a proud look on his face as he said with absolute certainty, The guards staggered at the same time and looked at each other again. This time, their eyes were filled with disbelief. Why didn't he realize in the past that the young prince was really stupid? Li Yi was a little hesitant. Why don't I not attack this poor child? Today, his worldview had been tossed and turned several times. Would he be able to endure another round of torment? If he let go, Li Xian, who saw the result, would not be able to bear the blow and go crazy. Ning Wang would definitely not let him go. He would most likely immediately take Xiao Huan, Ru Yi and the others and run away. Haha, why don't you dare to let go? Did I get it right? Seeing the hesitation on Li Yi's face, Li Xian laughed and snatched the leaves and stones from his hands, saying, I'll do it myself. Li Xian had a confident look on his face. The next moment he let go. Dong! The stones fell to the ground and made a dull sound. The leaves fell slowly, making a few ripples in the air, and fell silently at the feet of Li Xian. Li Xian's face was pale and his legs softened. If it weren't for the guards next to him, who saw that the situation was not good, and held him up, he would have collapsed on the ground. Young prince, what's wrong? The guards' faces were even paler than his. They even forgot that Li Xian had warned them not to call him young prince when they were outside. If something were to happen to the young prince, they would be held responsible. Let go of me. Li Xian broke free from the hands of the guards and stared blankly at the leaves at his feet. The expression on his face also became dull. At this moment, he felt that the world he had lived in for more than 10 years suddenly became extremely strange. When he turned to look at Li Yi, there seemed to be a cloud of fog in front of him. It was hazy, and he couldn't see clearly no matter how hard he tried. Li Yi was about to speak, but Li Xian immediately covered his ears. I don't want to listen. I don't want to listen. I don't want to listen. The dignified crown prince Ning fled in fear when Li Yi opened his mouth. When Li Xian arrived, he had a smile on his face, but when he left, his face was filled with worry, as if he had a lot on his mind. Fortunately, his mental fortitude was much stronger than Li Yi had expected. He did not break down, and he did not need the guards to support him as he walked. This caused Li Yi to have a higher opinion of him. Honestly speaking, if he were him, he would probably start to doubt the world and everything around him. It was already very fortunate that he didn't become a lunatic. Today's negotiation was very successful. The outdoor barbecue was also very successful. Young people shouldn't stay at home all day. They should go out more. After eating, drinking and playing, they could lie on the rocking chair in the courtyard, bask in the sun, and hum songs. Their lives were very pleasant. Li Yi, who was basking in the sun, suddenly felt that something was wrong. He opened his eyes and saw an old face with crisscrossed wrinkles. The old man revealed an interested expression and looked at the rocking chair he was sitting on. Second great uncle. Li Yi was almost scared to death by this old face at such a close distance. He immediately jumped up from the chair, his heart still beating nonstop. Hey little boy, your chair is not bad. Where did you buy it? Second great uncle of the Lu family, the most prestigious old man in the village, looked at Li Yi and asked with a smile. This old man doesn't even make a sound when he walks. Li Yi felt depressed. He calmed his beating heart and said, I made it at Uncle Han's place. Why? Do you like it too, second great uncle? Uncle Han was a lonely old man in the village. He originally had a son, but he later died of illness. Rui often asked Xiao Huan to deliver some rice and noodles to the old man. Sometimes, when Xiao Huan was busy with other things, it would be Li Yi's turn to deliver it. After a while, they became familiar with each other. When the old man was young, he knew some carpentry skills. If anyone's furniture in the village broke down, he would often repair it for free. Last time, when the chair at home broke down, Li Yi was too lazy to repair it. So he simply redesigned this kind of rocking chair and asked Uncle Han to make one for him. He could lie down and sit on it, and it was much more comfortable than the small broken chair he used to have. TSK, I didn't expect that Han brat to have such skills. Second great uncle put his hands behind his back and looked at the chair with interest. Just now he saw Rui lying on it, and it seemed to be very comfortable. It was the perfect chair to bask in the sun. Speaking of which, it seemed like it was time to change the chair at home. If second great uncle likes it. Respecting the old and loving the young was a traditional virtue. Seeing that the old man seemed to be interested in the chair, Li Yi waved his hand generously. If second great uncle likes it, I can ask Uncle Han to make another one for you. Second great uncle's expression froze for a moment. Then he showed a satisfied expression and said, good boy. Since you insist on giving it to me, I will reluctantly accept it. While Li Yi was stunned, second great uncle patted his shoulder lightly, picked up the rocking chair beside him, and turned to walk out the door. When Li Yi came back to his senses, he saw that second great uncle was already at the door. He hurriedly shouted, Second great uncle, wait. There's no need. I've already eaten, the old man's voice sounded, and in the next moment, he disappeared with the rocking chair in front of Li Yi's eyes. This old man's hand strength is pretty good. Seeing the old man easily pick up the huge rocking chair with one hand and disappear in an instant, Li Yi was stunned. He couldn't even lift the chair with one hand. The old man had been single for decades, and the effect was obvious. Chapter 131. In a magnificent mansion, there was a very elegant study. The fragrance of incense curled up in the air. 2 rows of carved bookshelves were filled with all kinds of books. Among them, there was no lack of rare copies. The paintings and calligraphy on the walls of the room were all the works of famous artists. Any one of them would be a priceless treasure. A middle-aged man dressed in luxurious clothes was sitting in front of the study table. He was holding an ancient book in his hands and reading it attentively. He was the only person in the study. Other than the occasional sound of pages being flipped, the atmosphere was unusually quiet. After a while, it seemed that he was tired. The middle-aged man closed the book and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. He looked at the bookshelf opposite him and said calmly, How is the investigation going? After a few breaths, a thin figure silently floated out from behind the bookshelf. Li Yi, from the Li family village in Anxi County. He passed the imperial examination at the age of 17 and became famous in the county. His performance in the following 2 years was nothing special, and there was no news about him. According to the village chief of the Li family village, he seemed to have lost his mind a few months ago. His mouth was full of nonsense. After he left the village, he never returned. An old voice sounded in the study. Lost his mind. The middle-aged man heard this and frowned slightly. It seems that the village chief's words were not true. There was no emotion in the old voice. After a pause, he said, This person is extremely talented in literature. Su Xuezheng once praised him as the #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom. His poems have reached the point that everyone in the Qing and prefecture knows about them. There is no possibility that he has lost his mind. Mr. Su rarely praises people like this, the middle-aged man said with slight surprise. If that's the case, then there's nothing wrong with his background? Although we have not found out why he appeared in Willow Leaf Village and has a family, there is no problem with his background. He did not deliberately get close to the crown prince. There was no change in the old voice's tone. He continued to state, The princess's favorite loose candied haws is his work. Speaking of which, I should thank him. The middle-aged man's expression softened. If it weren't for him, the princess would still be tormented by that strange illness. Not only that, in today's prince's mansion, from the princess to the maids, the favorite Rui nectar was also made by him. In the shadow of the bookshelf, a thin and small figure was faintly discernible. The voice continued, Under the instruction of the crown prince, the prince's mansion has already reached an agreement with him, but the old man's voice was emotionless, as if he was talking about something normal. If Li Yi was here, he would probably break out in a cold sweat. This old man simply knew him better than he did. After all, even he himself did not know what had happened before he transmigrated, of course. If he knew that the middle-aged man in the study was the famous Ning Wang, the true leader of Qing and prefectural city, he would not be surprised. These people of high status and power were all extremely suspicious. They would suspect anyone who approached them, suspecting that they had ulterior motives, and had ulterior motives. It was not as simple as just wanting to suck up to them. Since he has a scholarly reputation, Why would he lower his status and get involved with these mundane affairs? Ning Wang's expression was slightly puzzled. After a moment, he waved his hand and said, forget it, forget it. My mansion owes him a debt of gratitude. Let him take these small advantages. Otherwise, I really do not know how to reward him. Other than this, there is one more thing. This time, the old voice finally had a slight change. What is it? The crown prince is a little strange today. What's wrong with Xian? Ning Wang looked at the black shadow and asked. The crown prince has been throwing stones all day. Throwing stones? Ning Wang's expression was puzzled. Not only stones but also leaves, wood, cloth, gold, silver. There was finally some confusion in the old voice. Dong. In the prince's mansion, Li Xian asked a guard to stand on the top floor of a 2-story building and let 2 silver ingots of different sizes fall from the same height. He stared at the ground without blinking. When he heard a sound, he retreated to the side and stared straight ahead, as if he was thinking about something. Although there was only one sound in his ears, after repeating the same thing countless times, he still found a slight difference. 2 silver ingots did not fall at the same time absolutely. The trip to Willow Leaf Village seemed to open the door to a new world for him, and found a direction for his boring life. Compared with going to the brothel to listen to music, obviously, he was more interested in the 2 stones. The questions that Li Yi said sounded strange, but implied, which made him very curious. He wanted to find out the truth, but when he really tried to do it, he had no clue. Why 2 stones of different weights would fall at the same time? But when a piece of paper and a stone fell at the same time, the stone always fell first. If the piece of paper was crumpled into a ball, the falling speed would obviously be faster. What was the reason? Could it be that there was a force that he could not see that was preventing the piece of paper from falling? After thinking for a long time, Li Xian could only think of this possibility. He didn't care about the silver on the ground, turned around and walked outside. Little prince, where are you going? Several guards hurried to follow him. To Willow Leaf Village. At this moment, Li Xian wished he could grow a pair of wings and fly to Willow Leaf Village immediately to find Li Yi and ask what was going on. His rocking chair was taken away by second granduncle, so it was impossible to get it back. Li Yi had no choice but to ask Uncle Han to make another one for him. Uncle Han's craftsmanship was excellent and he worked quickly. After half a day, Li Yi could lie in the yard and bask in the sun again. This time, it didn't take long before Fong rushed in and said that the people who came to the village yesterday came again. Li Xian sent a few of his guards away, and old Fong eagerly followed after them. Yesterday, the fight between the 2 was stopped before it was over, which made Fong feel a little unsatisfied. Today, he could continue the fight between men. Tell me, is there a force that prevents the leaves and the pieces of paper from falling? Li Xian looked at him and asked eagerly. Hearing this, Li Yi was very surprised. How could he think of the problem of air resistance so quickly? Yes, in fact, not only the leaves and the pieces of paper, but anything that falls will be affected by this force. However, for the stones this force is too small. But the leaves and the pieces of paper are originally light, so they will be greatly affected, which is the reason why they fall slower than the stones. In his extremely expectant eyes, Li Yi nodded. I knew it was like this. Looking at the excited Li Xian rushing out of the yard with a face full of ecstasy, Li Yi didn't look back for a long time. He didn't expect that Li Xian had such a talent in this aspect. Was there finally a new star rising in the scientific world that hadn't developed at all? Chapter 132. Perhaps Li Xian wasn't a qualified little prince or a qualified hedonistic son, but he had an extremely strong curiosity, a spirit that dared to explore, and a little bit of talent. This allowed him to easily accomplish quite a bit in another direction. His worldview had been destroyed over and over again, but he did not collapse. Instead, he became braver and braver. He seemed to enjoy getting to the bottom of his doubts. If he could create a Galileo leaf from a different world, he would be famous in history as his first mentor. It seemed that Xiao Huan was Li Xian's first mentor. However, as the first mentor of his first mentor, he also felt a sense of achievement. Li Yi lay back in the chair and began to think about a problem. Even Li Xian found something he was interested in, and the meaning of life. What about himself? What did he want to do? Make money. That was just the process, not the goal. Now he could earn a lot of money every day. Once the business with the prince's mansion started, the profit would be even more astronomical. It could be said that if he had no other pursuit in this life, and only wanted to make money to retire, then Li Yi's dream had already been realized. So what should he do next? Continue to make money? It was undeniable that Li Yi was a little greedy, but that was a normal reaction when he had not yet solved the problem of food and clothing. He had a meal but did not know the next one, and he still wanted to eat better. When he earned a lot of money, he was no different from a stone. Stay in the stockade and retire? That was what he thought at first. But he was not as carefree as his second uncle. The most important thing every day was to lie in the yard and bask in the sun. After a long time, he was afraid that he would die of idleness or boredom. Find a place to practice in seclusion, and strive to become a second-rate master before he died? This idea was too nonsensical. He was already very satisfied. If he could improve his fighting capacity from 5 to 10, he would leave the fighting to Fong. If Fong could not beat him, there was still Rui. If Rui could not beat him, then Rui had to do it herself. Today, he could be considered to have made a name for himself at a young age. His career and family were both successful, but he had actually lost his goal and direction. Life was really as lonely as snow. Essentially, he was still a lazy person and could not think about things that were too far away. Every time he seriously thought about such things, he would feel a faint headache. Such a situation had never happened before, and he did not know if it was a side effect of his transmigration. Xiaochen closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead in frustration. Suddenly, he felt a pair of hands on his temples, massaging them gently. It felt exceptionally comfortable. The servant girl's massage technique was becoming more and more skillful. Li thought to himself as he enjoyed Xiao Huan's massage. After a while, he no longer felt the headache. In his heart, he was even more impressed by Xiao Huan's massage technique. In just a few days, her massage technique had actually improved by leaps and bounds. It was also at this moment that he finally felt that something was wrong. When the servant girl was by his side, she would not stop nagging. She would always talk about some daily things. Why was she so quiet today? Moreover, in order to drive away mosquitoes, the servant girl had been wearing Rui recently. There was always a mint smell around her. But it should not be this faint fragrance. Instead, it seemed that Rui had reached a certain level of martial arts. Their bodies naturally emitted a kind of momentum. Mosquitoes did not dare to approach them, and they rarely used Rui's lotion. The three women in the family each had their own merits. Li Yi had lived with them for so long, of course, he was very familiar with their unique smell. A familiar figure had already appeared in his mind. Li Yi hurriedly opened his eyes and saw Lu Rui standing behind him. She was stretching out her hand to massage his temples. In other words, from the start, she had been massaging him all along. Wife, why? Li Yi was surprised and was about to stand up. Lu Rui shook her head and said, "Husband, just lie down like this. This is what I should do." Li Yi could enjoy Xiao Huan's massage with a clear conscience, but if it was Lu Rui, he would feel a little strange. Neither of them spoke, and the atmosphere became quiet again. Actually, I have something that I have always been curious about. After a moment, a gentle voice finally reached Li Yi's ears. After being startled for a moment, he said, "Wife, there's no harm in saying it." Lu Rui looked at him with a trace of curiosity in her beautiful eyes. This was also a question that she had hidden in her heart for a long time. When husband first came to the stronghold, why did you not think of running away? She finally asked this question. With that, her gaze stopped on Li Yi's face. A normal person who was caught by Rui and the others should have tried to escape, but he seemed to have accepted his fate from the beginning. If he was a weak scholar who did not dare to fight back when he was bullied, it would be understandable. But after these days of interaction, Lu Rui could see that although he looked like a weak scholar on the surface, there was an unyielding spirit in his bones. It was impossible for him to accept his fate. If I said that it was because I could eat and stay here for free, and picked up a beautiful wife for free, and even had a servant to serve me, Would you believe me? Li raised his head and looked into her eyes as he said with a smile. The expression on Lu Rui's pretty face froze for a moment. Then she also bloomed into a smile. Since husband said so, I will naturally believe you. Perhaps even Lu Rui herself did not realize that after hearing Li Yi's words, she finally heaved a sigh of relief that had been in her heart for a long time. In the autumn afternoon, a light breeze blew, and the courtyard was actually a little chilly. Lu Rui combed her hair that had been messed up by the wind. As she listened to Li Yi talk about what happened that day, the corners of her mouth involuntarily curled into a charming smile. Wife, you don't know. That old man is very fierce. If you were caught by him that day, you would not have been able to wait for Rui and the others. Why did they catch you, husband? Who knows? Old people are getting old, and their brains might not be working well, just like second great uncle. Husband, lower your voice. Second great uncle's hearing is very good. Second great uncle's hearing? Haha. Amidst Li Yi's slightly disdainful mockery, the old man who was lying comfortably on a rocking chair and basking in the sunset of few courtyards opened his eyes lazily. He looked in a certain direction, and the corners of his mouth twitched. He turned over and continued to sleep. Little brat. The old voice did not leave the courtyard, but disappeared in the wind. Chapter 133. Why didn't you go back to take a look these days? Back to where? To the place where you used to live. Li Yi smiled and said, There's no one at home. It's just a house now. It's not important whether I go back or not. Li Yi had only laid in that house for a while. He didn't even have time to step into the house a second time before he fled the village. Brought here by Lu Rui, he had no memories of the past in his head. He naturally had no feelings for the village and the place he used to live. In comparison, this place was more like a home. Lu Rui thought of what he had just said. She looked at him and asked, Did you also not have enough to eat in the past? Li nodded. Just by looking at the house, he knew that the original owner of this body was only a poor scholar. Lu Rui asked with some confusion, You are so talented and know how to do business. Why did you also have to go hungry? These days, talented scholars didn't have to worry about food and clothing. According to Rui, when he wrote a poem, even the famous scholars in Qing and Prefecture were scared. Countless young ladies and rich ladies fought to invite him. Lu Rui couldn't understand why such a person would worry about making a living. What's more, whether it was candied haws or Rui nectar, they were all good things that could make money. Just the banknotes Li Yi asked her to keep these days were probably enough for an ordinary family to spend for a lifetime. Li Yi looked at her and said with some teasing, These two have nothing to do with each other. Talent can't be used to make a living, but martial arts can. My wife's martial arts are so high. If you were a bandit, I'm afraid you would be able to easily steal food. Wouldn't you still live a hard life? Lu Rui smiled and said, In fact, I also thought about it. At that time, I just wanted to take Rui and Xiaohuan to eat. I didn't care about other things. If I really reached that level, I'm afraid it's not impossible for me to go that far like you said. A bandit chief who didn't want to be a bandit was not a good chief. Although he was nominally the husband of the chief, he couldn't compare with the real bandit chief. With a wave of his arm, except for Fong and the others, no one responded. Willow Village might as well be called Willow Village or Willow Village. What a waste of this name. At present, it seemed that the man who wanted to be a bandit king, his dream had to be put aside for the time being. If one day, Li Xian's relatives couldn't force him to live anymore, he could consider rebelling against him. He could open a great mountain road and conquer the mountains one by one. When he had wealth, fame, and power, he could bury all the treasures in the mountains. He could say to the outside world, Do you want my treasures? I've buried them in the depths of the mountains. From then on, countless people with dreams rushed into the mountains. The Jing Kingdom officially stepped into the chaotic world of mountain bandits. History called it the era of mountain bandits. My husband, my husband. Seeing that Li Yi suddenly fell into a daze, Lu Rui stretched out her hand and waved it in front of his eyes. Li Yi came back to his senses and looked at Lu Rui. He asked, Besides being a bandit, What other dreams did you have? Other people would usually talk about their dreams when they were courting girls. After they got the girl, they would be too lazy to talk about these things. Li was the opposite. He didn't expect that she, who had always been gentle, actually had the idea of being a bandit. Shouldn't this be something that only Mississippi Lu would think about? Dreams. Lu Rui thought for a while and said, I thought about opening a martial arts school before. This was actually my father's wish. Unfortunately, although we weren't poor at that time, we didn't have much spare money. We couldn't afford the expenses of opening a martial arts school. After my father left, I didn't think about it anymore. My wife, if you want to do it, just do it. The money is just sitting there. It should be enough to open a martial arts school. Li thought for a while and said, if it's not enough, wait for a few more days. At that time, it won't be a problem to open 5, 6, 7 or 8 martial arts schools, let alone one. Lu Rui shook her head and said, my father has always wanted to spread the Lu family's martial arts. I don't think so far ahead. I have nothing to do now. Teaching a few children can be considered as fulfilling one of his wishes. Since it was his father-in-law's last wish, Li had to be a little more attentive and keep this matter in mind. After a few words, the topic changed. Although the two often talked before, it was the first time they had such a happy conversation like today. From the beginning, they treated each other with respect, like a strange but important friend. But now, they could joke around without any scruples. In the courtyard, Li lay on the chair. Lu Rui continued to use her unique technique to help him massage. Both of them had a faint smile on their faces. When Lu Rui walked in from outside, she had already seen some of the appearances of a real husband and wife. Her footsteps stopped at the door. After a moment of daze, she silently retreated. If it wasn't for Li Xian coming to bid farewell and ruining the rare time for the two of them, today would have been a perfect day. When they left, Li Xian looked at Li Yi with an extremely shocked expression. He asked in an incredulous tone, that little servant girl said that the ground we are stepping on is actually a big ball. Is this true? Yes. Seeing Li Yi nod with absolute certainty, Li Xian's expression became somewhat dazed again. Xiao Huan was still a young girl. Once something happened, she could not wait to share it with others. However, when she told the other sisters about the things son-in-law told her, no one believed her. They even said how could son-in-law say such silly things, and Xiao Huan must have made it up to make them laugh. Now, after much difficulty, she finally found a person who was willing to listen to her, and would not think that she was lying. The little servant girl told Li Xian all the unimaginable things that Li Yi told her when he was free. Li Xian now understood a principle. When something was different from what he thought, he should not be in a hurry to deny it. Only after he personally went to verify it, then he had the right to speak. But what kind of method did he have to go through to find out whether the ground they were stepping on was round or not? Several guards left with Li Xian. Fong and several men in the workshop also went down the mountain with them. The toilet water workshop in the city had been built. As technical consultants, Fong and others needed to personally guide them and train the workers sent to the toilet water workshop so that they could start work this morning. Remember, as long as no one is killed, you can do whatever you want. I only want the formula of the Rui dew. At the foot of the mountain, in a dense forest, more than 10 masked figures in black were lurking there. A young voice commanded in a deep voice. Chapter 134. You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. I'd like to see if the formula, or my life is more important. The young man looked towards a certain direction outside the forest with a vicious look on his face. He had wanted to buy the formula of the Rui dew at a low price, but he did not expect the shopkeeper to be so unappreciative and chase them out of the shop after a few words. Later on, his scheme was seen through by the shopkeeper and he failed again. Instead, his brother-in-law, who was a county lieutenant, became fearful and stopped providing him with any help. Seeing that the business of the Rui dew was booming, if he did not act now, he could only watch as the mountains of silver slipped away before his eyes. He had already sent people to find out that every morning, they would bring the Rui dew to the shop in the prefectural city. The shop would close at noon, and the shopkeeper would rent a carriage from the carriage shop to leave the prefectural city. This was the road that they had to pass. Since the soft approach did not work, he could only use the hard approach. He would intercept them on the road and force them to reveal the formula. When the time came, he would not be afraid that the shopkeeper would not speak. The men he hired were all scoundrels in the prefectural city. Each of them was good at fighting, and they were paid to do things. How could they not deal with a weak scholar? This time, even if the burly man was present, there was nothing for him to worry about. 2 fists were no match for 4 hands, and he had dozens of hands on his side. Even if the other party reported the matter to the authorities, the person in charge of arresting robbers in Anchi County was his brother-in-law. So naturally, the authorities would not investigate him. Moreover, there were many cases that could not be solved every year, so one more wouldn't make a difference. From the beginning to the end, he did not show himself, so the authorities would not be able to trace him. Of course, just in case, he could not open the shop in Qing'an Prefecture. The capital was a good place, and if he opened a few shops there, his business would probably be even better. Just as the young man was planning his beautiful future in his heart, a horse carriage slowly approached from afar. The carriage that they were waiting for was supposed to come from the direction of the prefecture city, but this carriage was heading in the opposite direction. The young man didn't pay much attention to it at first, but when he glanced to the side and saw a certain burly man walking in front of the carriage, his expression froze. Then, he immediately said in a low voice, "All of you stay alert. When the carriage in front comes over, your targets will be the people in the carriage. And the man in the front, beat him up." The dozen or so people hiding in the forest were all dressed in black, with half of their faces covered by a black cloth. They were leaning loosely against the tree, but after hearing the young man's words, they slightly raised their spirits, hid their bodies, and looked outside. The carriage continued to move forward slowly. A few figures followed behind the carriage at a steady pace. Among these people, the burly man in the lead was rather eye-catching. He was also the one that the employer had taken special care of just now. These people remembered his appearance in their hearts, so that when they took action later, they could take care of him appropriately. As for the others, they didn't seem to pose much of a threat to them. They had a huge advantage in numbers, and they were all very confident in their own skills, so they didn't think much of these people. Inside the carriage, Li Xian sat on the soft cushion, still thinking about a certain problem. If the ground beneath their feet was a big ball, then wouldn't the people on the other side of the ball fall into it? Then, an even more complicated problem surfaced in his mind. If they really fell, where would they fall to? When he thought about this, Li Xian knew that he couldn't continue thinking about it. This was already far beyond the scope of his understanding. Whoosh! The voice of the guard driving the carriage was heard, and the carriage suddenly came to an abrupt stop. Li Xian's body staggered, and he lifted the curtains of the carriage. He frowned and asked, "What happened? Why did we stop?" "Young master, stay in the carriage and don't come out. Something is not right in front," the guard driving the carriage said in a deep voice. Fong and the leader of the guards walked at the front, and when they looked at a certain dense forest on the side of the road, they frowned at the same time. The trees in the forest weren't thick, and they couldn't hide some people's bodies. Wearing black clothes and hiding in the forest in broad daylight, these people didn't look normal no matter how they looked at it. In the forest, seeing the carriage stop there, the people around the carriage also looked over. One of the men in black said with some suspicion, "Could it be that they found us? Impossible, we clearly wore black clothes. But it's daytime now." As soon as someone spoke, the surrounding atmosphere suddenly became awkward. The young man's face was a little hot, because he was the one who gave the order to wear black clothes and cover their faces. Didn't those novels always say the same thing? Now wasn't the time to worry about this. Originally, he wanted to wait for them to pass by and catch them off guard, but he didn't expect to be discovered so quickly. Since this was the case, of course, there was no need to hide anymore. A trace of determination flashed on the young man's face, and he suddenly waved his hand and said, "Go!" Fong and the other guards watched as the masked men in black rushed out of the forest. Their roars were louder than the previous one, but they were all empty-handed and had no weapons on them. The expressions on their faces were a little surprised. However, since these people were coming for them, of course, they couldn't be polite. The 4 people stayed to guard the carriage, while Fong, the leader of the guards, and the other 2 people went to meet the men in black. Because they had just received the young man's order, a small half of the dozen or so men in black rushed toward the carriage, while the other half headed toward Lao Fong and the others. A voice was heard saying, "Let's get rid of that man first." The man they were talking about was naturally Fong. As the employer's focus, on the surface, he also seemed to be the biggest threat to them. Immediately, half of the men rushed to him. The leader of the guards was stunned when he saw this. Half of the men actually rushed to that guy, and the other half to deal with the 3 of them. Wasn't this obviously looking down on them? The winner of the battle between the 2 people had not been decided yet. But in these people's eyes, it was obvious that the man surnamed Fong was stronger than them. This could not be tolerated. The leader of the guards coldly snorted and directly rushed to the half of the men in black who were rushing to Fong. "These people are mine." Of course, Fong was not to be outdone. He suddenly stamped his feet, and his speed suddenly increased a little. In the blink of an eye, he had already rushed to the group of men in black. The remaining 2 guards could only watch as their leader and the burly man surnamed Fong displayed their invincible might. They were like tigers that had entered a flock of sheep. Their actions were straightforward and efficient. In just a few breaths of time, the black-clothed men fell to the ground one after another. None of them could stand up again. "I have 3. I also have 3. The 2 of them looked up at the same time, and with fierce eyes, they looked at the other half of the men in black who were scared stiff. They coldly snorted at the same time, and rushed over again. The 2 guards heard banging sounds from time to time, and they thought that every punch must have landed on flesh. The 2 of them were stunned, and did not dare to rush forward to help. Looking at the posture of the 2 men, if the 2 of them went forward, they might also kill the 2 of them. They wanted to go to the other side to help, but when they turned their heads, they found that the battle around the carriage had also ended. The 4 people were still guarding the carriage, and the ground was covered with men in black. Bang! With a karate chop, Fong knocked out the last man in black. When he looked up, he found that the leader of the guards had already rushed to the direction of the forest. "You don't come over." Seeing that the people he had brought with him had fallen to the ground one by one, a look of horror finally appeared on the young man's face. He saw the fierce man approaching him step by step, and as he retreated he said with a trembling voice, My brother-in-law is the county lieutenant of this county. My brother-in-law is the county lieutenant of this county. He won't let you off for hitting me." "County lieutenant, right?" A cold smile appeared on the face of the leader of the guards, and he cracked the knuckles of his fingers. After a few breaths, screams began to echo in the forest. Chapter 135. Those who were dressed in black to act cool in broad daylight were just a bunch of rabble. After being beaten up by old Fong and the others, they obediently squatted in a row, not even daring to breathe loudly. Li Xian opened the curtain and took a look, then lost interest. These small matters could be handled by the guards. When Fong walked in front of those people, the person at the front immediately shivered and said with a trembling voice, "This has nothing to do with us. We were all paid to do this. Someone told us to do this." "Who ordered you to do this?" Fong clenched his fist and looked at him. As soon as his voice fell, the guard leader walked out of the forest with a young man with a swollen face. "It's him." The man in black was frightened by Fong's threatening action. He immediately pointed at the young man and said, "He told us to force the formula of Rui Du." The situation was stronger than the person. If he didn't tell the truth, he was afraid that he would taste the taste of this big man's fist again. He didn't hesitate to give up the mastermind. The young man's whole face was swollen. It took a while for Fong to find a familiar feeling. "So it's you." It was this guy who brought 2 people to the shop to force them to buy the formula of Rui Du. Fong had a deep impression of him. "Young master, these people are after the formula of Rui Du." The guard leader threw the young man who had already fainted on the ground and stood in front of the carriage and said, "Leave a few people to deal with it. If there's nothing else, go back to the city." A corner of the curtain was lifted, and Li Xian's voice came out. There were still a lot of unanswered questions. He didn't want to waste any more time here. "Yes," the leader of the guards responded, and then whispered a few words to the 3 guards. The carriage then set off, leaving the 3 guards behind to deal with this matter. Fong looked at the carriage with a puzzled expression, then turned his head to look at the guy who had yet to determine a winner. He couldn't help but feel astonished. Son-in-law had never mentioned what these people were doing, and Fong had never taken the initiative to ask either. He only knew that these people wanted to cooperate with them on Ruilu's business. At this moment, he finally realized that this gigolo friend of his son-in-law did not seem to be an ordinary person. "Go!" Watching the carriage leave, the 3 guards drew out their swords and pointed at the ruffians, who had already taken off their night clothes. Although there were only the 3 of them, the ruffians did not dare to act rashly or have any thoughts of resisting. After what happened just now, they realized that they had provoked someone they shouldn't have. If they behaved themselves, they might be able to avoid some physical pain. Moreover, although there were only 3 of them, each of them had extraordinary skills. If they were to really fight, they would be the ones to suffer. Moreover, the other party was holding a sword in their hands. Under the command of one of the guards, one of them carried the young man on his back and followed the rest of the people towards the prefectural city dejectedly. Qing'an Prefectural City, Anqi Prefectural Government. County Magistrate Lu sat on a wooden armchair at the back of the hall, while enjoying the massage from the beautiful concubine behind him. He was very satisfied. Ever since that unfilial son of his had been confined for half a month, he had become much more well-behaved. These days, he had been well-behaved and had not caused any trouble, which made County Magistrate Lu less worried. "Lord Lu, bad news. Bad news." Before he finished tasting his tea, the beautiful concubine's hand had already moved from his shoulder to somewhere else. County Magistrate Lu squinted his eyes, and the expression on his face became even more enjoyable. At this moment, a bailiff in plain clothes suddenly barged in and said with a panicked expression. The beautiful concubine's hand moved away in a hurry. County Magistrate Lu, who was enjoying the massage with his eyes squinted, was also startled. The hand holding the teacup trembled, and half of the tea spilled onto the hem of his clothes. Those who did not know would probably think that there was something wrong with him. Bastard. County Magistrate Lu put down the teacup and glared at the bailiff. He said loudly, "How many times have I told you to knock on the door before coming in? Are your ears just for decoration?" County Magistrate Lu was in the prime of his life. Sometimes, when he was in the mood, it was common for him to close the door and make love with the beautiful concubine here. If someone barged in like this in a panic every time, perhaps after a few times, before he could resign, his little brother would have to live in seclusion. Therefore, he had long set the rule of knocking on the door before entering. "I'm sorry, Lord Lu. It's my fault." At this time, the runner secretly complained in his heart. The matter was urgent, and he actually forgot the county magistrate's rule. He hurriedly retreated and calmed down. Then he knocked on the door and said, "Lord Lu, I have something important to report. Come in." After all, it was just a small bailiff. County Magistrate Lu did not care about him, but his voice still contained anger. "What's the matter? Say it." County Magistrate Lu picked up the teacup again, took a sip of tea, and said lightly, "These guys, who had never seen the world, usually made a fuss about little things, as if the sky was going to fall. This was the county government. Would anyone rebel?" The bailiff bowed respectfully and said unhurriedly, "Lord Lu, several people just said that they came from Prince Ning's mansion. They took many people to the county government, and even arrested the county lieutenant." Puff. County Magistrate Lu spat out the tea before he swallowed it. The teacup fell from his hand, and the hem of his clothes was completely wet by the tea. He suddenly stood up from the chair and asked loudly, "What did you just say?" The bailiff was also shocked and hurriedly repeated, "People from Prince Ning's mansion came and arrested the county lieutenant." They are waiting for you in the front hall. Why didn't you say such a big thing earlier? County Magistrate Lu showed anger on his face. He kicked the bailiff to the ground and hurriedly ran out without even changing his official uniform. He did not dare to let the people from Prince Ning's mansion wait for him. Speaking of which, he was quite aggrieved as a county magistrate. In other counties, the county magistrate was a big shot who could cover the sky with one hand. However, in Anxi County, in Qing'an Prefecture, the number of people who could crush him to death could not be counted with two hands. Prince Ning's mansion was the biggest monster that he could not afford to offend. As the blood brother of the current emperor, he was deeply trusted by the emperor and held great power. He had to be careful even if he was just a steward in the mansion. The bailiff struggled to get up from the ground. He touched his chest and said in a low voice with great grievance, "Didn't you ask me to knock before coming in?" County Magistrate Lu hurriedly ran from the back hall to the front hall. As soon as he stepped into the door, he saw more than 10 people squatting on the ground. The one at the innermost with a knife against his neck was County Lieutenant Zhou, who was still in a daze. County Magistrate Lu's heart sank at once when he looked at those men with sabers who wore stern expressions. This time, he might really have pierced the sky. Chapter 136. In the front hall. In addition to these people, there were also many yamen runners. At this time, they were holding water and fire rods and looking at the guards of Prince Ning Mansion with vigilance. They looked very nervous. After seeing County Magistrate Lu appear, they let out a long sigh of relief. Just now, these people swaggered into the county government and arrested County Magistrate Zhou without any explanation. At first, they thought that someone was rebelling and wanted to arrest them first. But after hearing that they were from Prince Ning Mansion, they dared not to act rashly. They were just lowly yamen runners. It was better not to provoke this kind of thing. In front of so many people, County Magistrate Lu had to show some dignity. He tidied his clothes and walked in slowly. Glancing at County Magistrate Zhou, he looked as usual and asked those guards, "I'm the county magistrate of this county. May I know who you are?" Before he finished his words, a guard took out a token from his waist. After recognizing the symbol of Prince Ning Mansion on it, County Magistrate Lu no longer had any doubts in his heart. He pointed to County Magistrate Zhou and said, "May I know what crime County Magistrate Zhou has committed to make you mobilize so many people?" In fact, County Magistrate Lu was extremely dissatisfied with these people from Prince Ning Mansion. No matter what, this was the Anxi County government, his territory. These people had captured his subordinates without distinguishing between right and wrong. And they even had a deadpan expression on their faces. Anyone would be displeased if they were in his shoes. However, they were Prince Ning's men after all, so he dared not show his dissatisfaction. "Is it a big crime to cover up and connive at the assassin who assassinated the young prince?" The guard looked at him coldly and asked, "What?" Hearing this, County Magistrate Lu's indifferent face disappeared. He staggered and almost fell to the ground in fear. He turned his head to look at County Magistrate Zhou with a strong disbelief and admiration on his face. He even dared to cover up the assassin who assassinated the young prince. Why didn't he know that County Magistrate Zhou was so bold? Even he, County Magistrate Lu, dared not do this. What County Magistrate Lu didn't know was that County Magistrate Zhou was also shocked at this time. When did he cover up the assassin who assassinated the young prince? He wouldn't dare to do that even if he was 10 times more courageous. Although he didn't know why these people would wrongly accuse him, there was one thing he was very clear about. If he didn't explain himself clearly, he would really die today. Assassinating a relative of the imperial family, the lightest punishment would be exile for 3,000 miles. If it was a little more serious, it was even possible to lose one's head. Even if it was covering up, it was still a very serious crime. Just at this time, the young man lying in the corner finally woke up. As he opened his eyes, he saw his brother-in-law, who was the county magistrate, and finally released the grievances in his heart, and shouted, "Brother-in-law, they beat me. Arrest them." It was also at this time that the young man lying in the corner finally woke up. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw his brother-in-law, who was a county lieutenant. The countless grievances in his heart were finally released. He shouted loudly, "Brother-in-law, they beat me. Quick, send someone to arrest them." Unlike the county magistrate who needed to be appointed by the emperor, the county magistrate had always been appointed by the local government. They were mainly in charge of justice, arresting bandits, collecting taxes, and other affairs. Although they didn't have a high position, in the eyes of ordinary people, it was already a very high position. The county magistrate was in charge of the administrative affairs of the county, and it was the county magistrate who was in charge of the specific execution. Judging cases and collecting taxes were all the duties of the county magistrate, which were closely related to the people. To a certain extent, having a county magistrate as his brother-in-law was enough for him to do whatever he wanted in Anchi County. Although there were many people here that he couldn't afford to offend, it definitely didn't include these guys who came from the mountains. "Brother-in-law, they beat me. Arrest them." When the young man shouted, County Magistrate Joe couldn't say a word anymore, as if he was choked by someone. Just now, with a knife against his neck, he was so frightened that he didn't see the unconscious young man at all. County Magistrate Joe opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face was pale. He never expected this. County Magistrate Liu also looked at the young man in astonishment. The one who assassinated the young prince was actually County Magistrate Joe's brother-in-law? In that case, there was nothing more to say. Although he didn't believe that guy actually had the guts to rush to assassinate the young prince. No matter whether there was any misunderstanding or not, County Magistrate Joe couldn't escape this time. It was probably because of his brother-in-law, who was a county magistrate, that the young man could rely on him and run amok everywhere. This time, he finally kicked a hard iron plate. It seemed that County Magistrate Joe didn't know anything about this matter. But since such a thing had happened, his position as county magistrate would definitely be gone. As for what kind of punishment he would have after his dismissal, it could only depend on Prince Ning's mansion's attitude. No, after I go back, I have to restrain that unfilial son of mine. If he continued to act like he did before, I'm afraid that tomorrow's County Magistrate Liu would be today's County Magistrate Joe. At this time, it was not County Magistrate Joe who hated the young man the most, but those ruffians who were hired by him. More than a dozen pairs of fiery eyes stared at him, as if they wanted to skin him alive. They thought it was just an ordinary fight, but who would have thought that the other party was actually a young prince? Just for a tale of silver, they even sacrificed their lives. At this time, the young man had already sensed that something was wrong. He stared blankly at County Magistrate Joe, who still had a knife on his neck, and stopped shouting. His heart gradually sank. These people's target was obviously not Li Xian, but since it involved the young prince, they naturally couldn't let them go so easily. Beheading and exiling them was a bit too severe, and it also needed to be approved by the emperor. Although these people were wrong, they didn't deserve death. However, forcibly snatching the formula of Rui Du also targeted Prince Ning's mansion. Even if they didn't die, they would still lose a layer of skin. Seeing that the people of Prince Ning's mansion didn't seem to want to make the matter bigger, County Magistrate Liu let out a long sigh in his heart. However, he didn't expect that the popular Rui Du and Qing and mansion was actually Prince Ning's mansion's business, which really surprised him. It must be said that County Magistrate Joe was really unlucky to meet such an outrageous relative who even dared to snatch the Prince Ning's mansion's business. No matter what, the county magistrate was one of the big shots in the county government. What happened in the county government today quickly spread out. Did you hear? Something happened in the county government today. No way. What could happen in the county government? I also heard from the brothers who work in the county government. This time, County Magistrate Joe is probably in big trouble. I heard that it was County Magistrate Joe's brother-in-law who asked someone to force the formula of Rui Du. I didn't expect that Rui Du was also related to Prince Ning's mansion. Rui Du? You mean the Rui Du sold in Rui Workshop in the city? Other than Rui Workshop, which other shop in the city sells Rui Du? What Rui Du is related to Prince Ning's mansion? In a courtyard with high walls, there came the sound of a teacup shattering. How could it be? Hearing this news, a famous rich merchant in Qing and Mansion was dumbfounded. Fortunately, we haven't done anything otherwise. In other places, there were also people who were shocked and broke out in a cold sweat. Chapter 137. Li Yi only found out about this after Fong and the others returned from the prefectural city. Li Yi could only mourn for the fool who wanted to block Li Xian's carriage. He had originally thought that when the shop operated by Ning Wangfu opened, those who were eyeing Rui's Lu would naturally give up on their evil thoughts. After being stirred up by that foppish son, everyone had probably gotten wind of it and no longer dared to have any thoughts about Rui's Lu. After calming down and thinking carefully, the conclusion Li Yi arrived at made him sigh endlessly. If he didn't know Li Xian and didn't cooperate with Ning Wangfu on Rui's Lu, even a small county officer would have brought him a lot of trouble. After all, one was a commoner and the other was an official. The people who came to frame them and the constables who colluded with them were most likely instructed by the county officer. In this day and age, it was better to be an official. If he was a county officer, wouldn't there be none of these things? Of course, if he really wanted to be a county officer, Li Yi was also unwilling. It wasn't worth it to do so many things with such a small salary. Wouldn't it be better to hold on to the thigh of Ning Wangfu? Wouldn't it be better than being some county magistrate? Of course, distant water couldn't quench immediate thirst. Not every time something happened, Li Xian would appear at the right time. If he could hold on to one more thigh, he would have one more choice when the time came. Therefore, when the patrolling female arrestor passed by the entrance of the shop, Li Yi greeted her politely. "Arrestor Li, you're patrolling the streets again. Do you want to come in and have a cup of water? Do you have wine?" The girl in light blue looked at him and raised her eyebrows as she asked. "Yes," Li Yi replied with a smile. The wine was a strong liquor, made using the distillation method. Before the wine shop that cooperated with Ning Wangfu opened, it was the only one in Qing, a prefectural city. If there was wine, there would naturally be dishes. Things were different now compared to when he first came here. With money, he didn't have to live a life without much money. 2 cold dishes and 2 hot dishes were made by Li Yi himself. They were perfect to go with wine. "Constable Li, please." Emingzu Li looked at the dishes on the table as a look of astonishment flashed across her face. "Didn't you say that you only came in for a glass of water?" No matter how he looked at it, the scene in front of him seemed to have been prepared. He glanced at Li Yi and sat down. Regardless of what he was thinking, at least the dishes and wine looked good. It could be seen that he had put some effort into it. He picked up his chopsticks and took a bite of the side dish that smelled pretty good. He was very satisfied with this unique taste. "What's the matter? Say it." He took another sip of wine and looked at Li Yi indifferently. She actually admired this scholar's ability. For the sake of this table of dishes and wine, if his request was not too excessive, she would consider it. "Constable Li, you misunderstood. If it wasn't for you, I'm afraid that the lawsuit at Rui Restaurant would have been unavoidable. This is just a small dish and wine to express my gratitude." Li Yi smiled and looked at her calmly. He really didn't have anything to ask of this female constable at the moment. Even if he did, he couldn't say it out loud. As the saying goes, if you take something from someone, you'll have to bear the consequences. The Anqi County government was not far from the shop. If this princess dined and drank here for a few times, how could she stand by and watch when something really happened in the future? He was only building a good relationship now. Of course, he couldn't casually ask for anything. "It's my duty. No need to thank me." Emingzu Li glanced at him and continued to eat and drink. Needless to say, these dishes and wine were very much to her taste. "I heard that you've cooperated with Prince Ning Mansion in the business of Rui Nectar?" Li nodded. The news had spread pretty fast. Today was only the 2nd day. "You're smart." The wine that old Fong had secretly hidden was almost finished by her, but her expression did not change. She looked at Li Yi with a rare hint of approval in her eyes. It was undeniable that Rui Nectar was a good thing. It contained a huge profit. Few people could resist the temptation. If one didn't have enough power, he couldn't protect such a treasure. It wouldn't be long before he was devoured by those people. The smartest way was to climb up a higher tree and give up a part of the profit to protect himself. But she didn't expect him to have the ability to climb up to Prince Ning Mansion. It seemed that his relationship with her cousin was not ordinary. When Emingzuli thought of this, someone walked in from the door. The next moment, Li Xian looked at her in surprise and asked, "Emingzu, why are you here?" After saying this, he suddenly sniffed and asked, "What's so fragrant?" Following the fragrance, he looked at the wine and dishes on the table. After a while, there was another pair of chopsticks on the table. Li Xian looked at his cousin, who was drinking by herself on the side with some confusion. He was a little confused about why she would appear here, but his attention was soon attracted by the wine and dishes in front of him. He poured a cup of wine and just picked it up. Thinking that he came here for official business today, he hesitated and put it down. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "You said that the ground under our feet is round. Do you have any proof?" "No." Li Yi took a sip of tea and said straightforwardly. With Li Xian's curious baby personality, if he explained, the other would definitely ask questions endlessly. It was better not to give him any chance. "Then what you said last time. Why do leaves fall to the ground? Why do mirrors appear in the water? And..." Li Xian didn't dwell on the question just now. Anyway, he still had a lot of questions, and there would be opportunities to ask. The expression on Li Yi's face froze. Then he looked at him and said seriously, "Let's talk about the problem of the ground being round." Li Xian looked up at him, waiting for him to explain. Actually, to be accurate, it should be a ball, and not so round. This problem was actually not difficult to explain. The curved sea surface. The ships that came from the sea would always see the mast first, and when they looked up at the sky, the two sides were low, and the middle was high. These common phenomena in daily life could all be explained. Even using an analogy, it could be easily explained. The moon and the sun were both round, but the ground under their feet was square. Wasn't it a little weird and unsociable? However, Li Xian had never seen the sea before. He ran to the courtyard to look at the sky, but he couldn't see the difference between the height of the sky and the height of the moon, nor could he understand the relationship between the moon and the ground under their feet. Li Yi began to feel a headache. "I'm going to patrol the streets." Emingzu finally understood why the two of them had such a close relationship. It was very normal for two people who were suffering from hysteria to feel like they understood each other. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.